Okay, it's time. Happy Monday, June 12th, 2023. Happy Monday. It is 3:33 p.m. Mountain Time. How we doing? Welcome to the stream. Got out of work early. Usually I still have another hour or so. But I worked a bunch of extra hours on Friday last week. And they said I could flex my time, and I'm like, well, I'll do a couple hours on today, Monday, so that I could stream this, and then also so I can play Rust with my friend Ethan, because I know the rest of the week's going to be a little busy, So, and yeah, I just felt like let me ease into the week a little bit. It was a long week last week, So we're here. We're here now. In case this is your first time tuning in to this, whatever this thing is called, we've been watching every presidential debate, going in chronological order. We've done, I want to say, like 9 in total. Maybe I'm off by that number. I don't know. I might be off on that number, but we're in 1988 now. We started in 1960, so we've gone 2 decades almost 3. We've seen Carter, we've seen JFK, we've seen everyone's favorite, I guess, Ronald Reagan. What's that Volvet chest? Hello, hello. What kind of leftist are you? I don't know. The best one. I don't know. It's not competition. I don't know. I'm anti-capitalist. That's important, right? Anti-hierarchy. More on the anarchist tendency, I guess you can say. But labels often lead to, at least I feel like online, labels most of the time I just feel like just get into a well, then you must believe this or you must believe that, or well, you're wrong, and then it's the whole thing. So anti-capitalist is the easiest way I describe myself, I think. But yeah, we're watching all these debates to kind of prepare ourselves potentially, if there is going to be any. I'm hoping there will be. Sorry, cat's food just went off. Went off again. Damn, she's getting double. For the Republican primaries in August, that hopefully will happen. Hopefully we'll get some debates. And we're kind of watching all these to see. I mean, they're not primary debates. I guess they're not exactly the same, but we're just seeing in general too of has the debates changed in any way in format? They definitely have in the last 20 years that we've watched. Have policies changed for parties? Have talking points changed for parties? When did it start to maybe get a little more feisty? I don't know. I'm just a sicko, so I like this kind of stuff. And yeah, so we're just kind of watching this. It's been kind of fun, very chilled, laid back. I try not to pause it too much, try to keep them going, because sometimes we're going to be sitting here for at least 5 hours. Luckily, today we got another short one. We only have 2 debates today, and they're both an hour and a half. So we'll cruise through these, I think, today. But then after this, I think we get Bush versus Perot versus Clinton, and I think there's 3 of those, and I think they're all an hour and a half. And that'll be interesting because we hasn't been a debate yet where we've seen 3 people. And I don't think there's been one since. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, we're on a good pace here to end by end of July, I think. I am taking the weekend off, this upcoming weekend, going camping. So I'm hoping to really, if I can knock out this one, I think we're going to be in a good spot to keep going. So, yeah, that's what we're doing today. But before we start, I had to show you because I thought this was cool. I showed Ethan this over text. Freaking Boo from Dragon Ball. There was a whole bunch of anime. They're just sparkling waters. They're not like sodas, I don't think. So it's made in Taiwan. But they're all different Dragon Ball characters, but we got a couple. Got one Sailor Moon one. But yeah, I just had to get it. Sorry it's a little glary with the light, but we're trying to find a Sonic one to put on the podcast. Yeah, then there was, well, those are also, well, I know G Fuel does the Sonic ones. There was a Knuckles one that they did in limited edition. I never have seen it, but they usually have them there. But I saw this as its own section, and I'm like, I gotta get the anime, water. I haven't tried it yet, so we'll see how it tastes. But I didn't realize this, but Dragon Ball was in the 80s. I didn't know that. I thought it was a 90s thing. But I was looking at Hulu the other night, and I saw it was like 85. So if anything, this fits. Well, maybe not Boo. I know Boo I think was 90s, but Dragon Ball fits with the time period of which we're watching today. See how that works? The world's crazy like that. But, yeah, because I was looking at the Hulu has a decent amount of anime. I'm pretty surprised by it. I'm hoping to go to Japan next year, and I feel like I need to, like, you know, watch more anime, so that if I go to like a anime toy store, that I can actually know what things are. So, all right, tangent over. Let's just get into this shit. But first, I shouldn't say but first because we are talking about it. But hold up. There we go. Streamlabs never remembers the browser window for whatever reason. So I was just reading up on this election. Spoiler alert, Bush wins once again by a pretty big landslide. The Republican Party has, at least on the presidential level, has absolutely dominated the 80s. No one's come close to fighting him or fighting them. Yeah, and Bush was part of the Reagan administration. So I guess there was a third party, Benson, who got one electoral vote. But I was like, who is this Dukakis guy? I think that's how you pronounce his name. Dukakis, maybe? We'll probably find out shortly. But just reading up on the primaries, and did you know that Joe Biden ran for president in the same primaries? Joseph Robinette Biden ran. And also, Al Gore ran as well. Al Gore ran in this election as well, in this primary. A couple other people did who did also run previously. Gary Hart, Mario Cuomo, who I'm pretty sure is related to, I'm sure, to the other Cuomos in the modern day. But it's really interesting. Actually, the reason Joe Biden's campaign ended was because he got hit for plagiarism. Joe Biden's campaign also ended in controversy after he was accused of plagiarizing a speech by Neil Kinnock, then leader of the British Labour Party. The Dukakis campaign secretly released a video in which Biden was filmed repeating a Kinnock stump speech with only minor modifications. Biden later called his failure to attribute the quotes an oversight and released proceedings to the Delaware Supreme Court Board on Professional Responsibility cleared him of a separate plagiarism charge leveled for plagiarizing an article during his law school. This ultimately led him to drop out of the race. Dukakis later revealed that his campaign had leaked the tape and 2 members of his staff resigned. Then Biden obviously would run again in 2008 and successfully in 2020. Yeah, then Al Gore also was in there, and he was 40 in 1988. And if he did win, he would have been the youngest man to contest for the presidency on a major party ticket since William Jennings Bryan in 1896. And he'd be the youngest president ever elected, younger than John F. Kennedy. But this goes to show you that some of these people, no problem, Ethan. Some of these people, are in the game for so long. They've been in the game for so long, and that's why people like Pete Buttigieg, right? When Obama called them during the 2020 primaries, told him, "Hey, drop out. You'll have another shot later." That's probably true. That is probably true. And sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 20. For Joe Biden, it was almost 40 years later, 33 years later. So, Goes to show. And then obviously Bush was, like I said, vice president of Reagan. So this is just a continuation of the Reagan administration in my eyes. Running mates, Dan Quayle. He looks familiar. Lloyd Benston, who got the one vote there. So it's weird that he got a vote as vice president. Also from Texas. George Bush, obviously being from Texas. George H.W. Bush being from Texas. So, yeah, we have an interesting setup here. Supposedly, where was I reading that? Like, yeah, after the Walter Mondale, who did like the whole New Deal type liberal, that they kind of try to go different tactics with Dukakis. So I'm curious what'll be different under Dukakis, saying when hear what he says. But yeah, never heard of this guy. I'll be honest, never heard of him. So he must have been easily forgotten. But I also didn't hear of Mondale. But that's what happens, I guess, in these landslide elections. You just are forgotten, and probably for the best. All right, let's do the first one here. Winston-Salem. That's not Salem, Massachusetts. Yeah, North Carolina, different Salem. September 25th, 1988. So the last couple ones where there was two, they started in mid-October, and one was like usually a week before. So this one's a little bit different here. We have one in late September. This one's October 13th. So there wasn't one more closer to the election, which is interesting. Usually they have one closer to the election. Maybe we'll read up on it after we watch these to see if maybe there was a third one that got canceled or something. So that we've seen that happen before. I also wonder if the League of Women Voters is running these again. They have been the last couple times. It doesn't say here if they did. But we'll see. All right, y'all. Let's do it. And also, just a reminder, as always, there might be language used by the candidates or by the moderation or the panelists, whatever, in the videos here that may not be politically correct today. Just FYI. It's actually been pretty good on that regard, but yeah, just remember that when watching this. Really wish they had closed captions, though.
Good evening. On behalf of the Commission on Presidential...
We're almost, I was going to say not almost HD, but we're getting there. I feel like the last 10 years of these debates, they've gotten a lot better visually.
Debates. I am pleased to welcome you to this first presidential debate of the 1988 campaign. I'm Jim Lara of the McNeil-Lara NewsHour. My colleagues on the panel are John Mashik of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Ann Grower of the Orlando Sentinel, and Peter Jennings of ABC News. For the next 90
only
minutes,
one major
we will
outlet.
be questioning the candidates
for
President of the United
paper.
States following a format designed and agreed to by representatives of the two candidates. The candidates are Vice President George Bush, the Republican nominee, Governor Michael Dukakis, the Democratic nominee.
Damn, they coming out. Dude, Bush is tall. Holy shit. He's like a giant compared to him. Oh, those are cameras. That's what we always thought, because they had them back in the older debates, too. Those are cameras back there. Also, once again, crowds clapping. The very last debate we watched, last chunk of debates we watched, that was the first time we had audience clapping or like cheering for some of the things that the candidates were saying, and the panelists told them to not do that, but then they never really like enforced it in any way. They just kept doing it. So I feel like that's kind of where it started, this idea that you're allowed to cheer during these debates and whatnot. So we'll see if that happens more in this. But yeah, I don't remember them ever walking on stage and people clapping. Usually they're already out. This is good, by the way. The boo juice is good.
Our questions this evening will
ends
be about
suddenly.
equally divided between foreign and domestic policy matters.
Okay.
The first question, by agreement between the two candidates, goes to Vice President Bush. It is a domestic question. You have 2 minutes for an answer, sir.
All right.
The polls say the number one domestic issue to a majority of voters is drugs.
Oh
What
my
is there
God.
about these times that drives
Forget war
or
on
draws
drugs was a
so
big
many
thing now.
Americans to use drugs?
I think we've seen a deterioration of values. I think for a while as a nation we condoned those things we should have condemned. For a while, as I recall, it even seems to me that there was talk of legalizing or decriminalizing marijuana and other drugs.
Yeah,
and
we
I
should.
think that's all wrong. So we've seen a deterioration in values. And one of the things that I think we should do about it in terms of cause is to instill values into the young people in our schools. We got into this feeling that value-free education was the thing. And I don't believe that at all. I do
But
believe
your
there are
administration
fundamental
was
rights and wrongs as far
president,
as
or Reagan
use.
was president
And
for
of course, as far as
8 years.
how we make it
See, if
better,
I'm
yes, we can do
if
better
I'm
on
against him,
interdiction, but
I'm
we've
gonna
got
bring
to
that
do a
up and be
lot
like,
better
well,
on and we've got to do a lot better on
maybe all the kids are
education.
smoking weed because
And
of your
we have to
administration.
be tougher on those
Maybe we need a
who
different
commit
perspective.
crimes. We've got to get after the users more. We have to change this whole culture. You know, I saw a movie, Crocodile Dundee,
Oh my
and I
God.
saw the cocaine scene treated with humor, as though this was a humorous little incident.
What?
And it's bad. Everybody ought to be in this thing. Entertainment.
No
industry,
freedom of
people
speech anymore, baby.
Involved in the schools, education. And it isn't
Says
a
Bush.
Republican or Democrat or a liberal problem, but we have got to instill values in these
It's in the
young
video
people.
games, it's in the
And,
movies.
I have put forward a many-point drug program that includes what I would do as President of the United States in terms of doing better on interdiction and in terms of doing better in the neighborhoods. But I think we're all in this together. And my plea to the American people is values in the schools.
Stop smoking weed.
Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Say blaze
Mr.
it.
Bush, that values are important. But it's important that our leaders demonstrate those values from the top. That
get
means
'em.
those of us who are elected to positions of political leadership have to reflect those values ourselves. Here we are with a government that's been dealing with a drug-running Panamanian dictator. We've been dealing with him. He's been dealing drugs to our kids. And governors like me
What
and
a
others
great
have been
first
trying to deal
question.
with the consequences.
I can't believe we're
I
talking
remember
about
being in
it's
a
already
high school
crazy.
in my own state as we were organizing something we call the Governor's Alliance Against Drugs, and a young 16-year-old girl coming up to me, desperate, addicted, dependent, saying, "Governor, I need help." We're providing that young woman with help, but I want to be a president of the United States who makes sure that we never again do business with a drug-running Panamanian dictator, that we never again funnel aid to the Contras who convicted drug dealers. Values begin at the top, in the White House. Those are the values I want to bring to the presidency and to the White House beginning in January of 1989.
Governor, a follow-up question. You have 2 minutes to answer it. Are you suggesting, sir, that President Reagan is one of the causes of the drug problem in
Yes.
this country?
I'm saying that those of us who are elected to positions of political
Yes.
leadership, Jim,
Say it.
have a special responsibility, not only to come up with programs, and I have outlined and detailed a very important, very strong program of enforcement as well as drug education and prevention. And Mr. Bush is right. The two go hand in hand. But if our government itself is doing business with people who we know are engaged in drug profiteering and drug trafficking, if we don't understand that that sends out a very, very bad message to our young people, and it's a little difficult for me to understand just how we can reach out to that youngster that I talked about and to young people like her all over the country and say to them, we want to help you. Now, I've outlined in great detail a program for being tough on enforcement at home and abroad, doubling the number of drug enforcement agents, having a hemispheric
cops.
summit soon after the 20th of January when we bring our Democratic neighbors and allies together here in this hemisphere and go to work together But we also have to take demand seriously. You know, we have 5% of the world's population in this country. We're consuming 50% of the world's cocaine.
Holy shit.
In my
If
state,
that
I'm
number
proud
is
to
true,
say
holy
we've
shit.
organized a drug education and prevention program which
That's
the Federal
crazy.
Drug Enforcement Administration
I don't know if I
says is
believe
the
it,
model
though.
for the country. We're helping youngsters. We're
This is,
reaching out
like I
to
said, peak war on drugs
them. And
era.
we're beginning with drug education and prevention beginning in the early elementary grades in every elementary school in our state, and that's the kind of effort we need in every elementary school.
Every
in the United
kindergartner
States
was
of
doing
America.
cocaine, man.
And we've got to begin early in the first, second, and third grade before our youngsters begin to experiment with these very, very dangerous substances. I guess the question I would ask of Mr. Bush is how we instill those values, how we create this environment for the drug-free schools that we want in this country, if he or representatives of the administration are either dealing with and involving people like Noriega in our foreign policy or don't pursue that connection in a way that makes it possible for us to cut it off and to be an example to our kids all over this country.
A minute to rebut, Mr. Vice President.
Well, the other day, my opponent was given a briefing by the CIA. I asked for and received the same briefing. I am very careful in public life about dealing with classified information, and what I'm about to say is unclassified. 7 administrations were dealing with Mr. Noriega. It was the Reagan-Bush administration that brought this man to justice. And as the governor of Massachusetts knows, there was no evidence that Mr. Noriega was involved in drugs, no hard evidence until we indicted him. And so I think it's about time we get this Noriega matter in perspective. Panama is a friendly country. I went down there and talked to the president of Panama about cleaning up their money laundering. And Mr. Noriega was there, but there was no evidence at that time. And when the evidence was there, we indicted him, and we want to bring him to justice. And so call off all those pickets out there that are trying to tear down 7 different administrations.
All right. The next question will be asked by John Massey.
Damn, what a
It goes
great,
to Governor Dukakis, and
at least in terms of entertainment value, great first question. Like, just Bush's first answer. The first thing that he says, the first time we're introduced to him from a debate perspective, is about marijuana and saying we need to, we're not going to decriminalize marijuana. We're not going to make it legal. And, just peak war on drugs. It's just crazy. That's definitely one of the more crazy answers we've heard in all these debates, and it's the very first one. I feel like this might be, like I said, from an entertainment value, might be an interesting debate here.
you will have 2 minutes to answer.
Governor Dukakis, another troublesome issue for voters this year is the bulging federal deficit. In a Dukakis administration, you say taxes will be raised only as a last resort. Would you identify for us then, please,
Reagan also said the same thing.
programs that you are willing to cut to bring that deficit down?
Yes, and I've been very specific about those, John, and let me lay out for you my own strategy for bringing that deficit down, because as a chief executive that's balanced 10 budgets in a row, I've had to make those tough decisions and those tough choices. First, I've suggested that there are certain weapon systems which we don't need and we can't afford. Mr. Bush has been critical of me for that, but I think those are the kinds of tough choices you have to make. I've also suggested that there are weapon systems that we should proceed on, and I've outlined those in detail. Secondly, we've got to invest in economic growth in this country, in every part of this country. Building that kind of growth expands revenues and helps to bring down that deficit. Thirdly, we have to bring interest rates down, and we will as we come up with a good, solid plan with the Congress.
Okay, well, 2 of those
bringing that deficit down.
are pretty vague.
Finally, we've got to go out there and collect billions and billions of dollars in taxes owed that aren't being paid in this country. It's very unfair to the average taxpayer who pays his taxes and pays them on time to permit these monies to go uncollected. I've also suggested
Who, though?
on the
Be
domestic
specific.
side, there are areas where we can make some cuts.
Who is that?
We ought to be able to come up with an agricultural policy in this country that gives our farm families a fair price and a decent future without spending $20 to $25 billion a year, which is what we've been doing under this administration. We can help people to live better lives and at the same time save money by helping hundreds of thousands of families on welfare to get off of welfare and to become productive citizens again.
It's always interesting.
The thing I don't understand about
well, let me finish.
Mr. Bush's approach to this is how he could possibly be serious about bringing that deficit down, given what he says he wants to do. He seems to want to spend a great deal of money on just about every weapon system. He says he's against new taxes, although he's broken that pledge at least 3 times in the last year that I know of. He wants to give the wealthiest taxpayers in this country a 5-year, $40 billion tax break.
Okay, there we go.
And he also wants to spend a lot of money on additional programs. If he keeps this up, he's going to be the Joe Azuzu of American politics.
I don't know who that is. Okay, got some claps,
I hope he won't take my 5 seconds away from me, but I will say this.
Your 2 minutes is up, Governor.
If he's serious about what he's saying, then the only place he can go to balance that budget is to raid the Social Security Trust Fund. And he tried that in 1985, and I think he's going to try it again.
I was going to say with the farmers thing, we've seen them both sides try to like talk about farmers and what they need. That's always interesting to me because I think that what they're trying to do with that is that if they can even swing like, because usually especially in like states where, because most of the time the cities have the high amount of voting or have the majority of the votes happening there, especially in more blue states, right? Just historically, because obviously there's millions of more people in the city compared to out in the suburbs versus the rural areas, right, in the farming areas. And I think this is them always trying to see if they can even flip, especially if you're a Democrat who doesn't normally maybe get those more rural votes, that you're trying to get them, by talking about farmers, all that during debates and whatnot. Because if you flip maybe 25% of them, and then you, assuming you get the cities like you normally do, or a good chunk of them, that might get you an easy victory in a state like that. And also might help with the Rust Belt area as well.
You have a minute to rebut.
Is this the time to unleash our one-liners? That answer was about as clear as Boston Harbor. Now,
oh my gosh, dude, they're going for the jokes, both of them.
Yeah.
We got 2 charismatic candidates finally.
Let me help the governor. There's so many things there, I don't quite know where to begin.
Because that's like I said, that's my real belief is that Reagan was just charismatic, and that's what got him both victories.
Paul Tsongas, a liberal senator from Massachusetts, said the dumbest thing I did was to oppose the capital gains.
Mondale wasn't very charismatic. Carter obviously wasn't.
It's going to increase revenues to the federal government.
Dukakis so far definitely has some more charisma.
So that's one of the things that I think makes a big difference between us. Massachusetts doesn't have an enormous defense budget, but nevertheless, the governor raised taxes 5 different times. That happens to be a fact. And so let's kind of stay on the issue, and I have made a specific proposal for what I call a flexible freeze, and it permits, economists on the East Coast and West think it's good, it permits the president to sort out the priorities, and we continue to grow because I will not raise taxes.
Your time is up too.
Yes.
A follow-up.
He won't raise taxes, but
Mr. Vice
he'll do a
President, you have
freeze?
vowed not to raise taxes of any kind during your administration, and at the same time, you've proposed this capital gains cut. You've proposed more incentive breaks for the oil industry. You've suggested new spending programs, and even some Republicans say the flexible freeze you just spoke about will hardly make a dent in the deficit. Is the deficit no longer really a concern of yours, the Republican Party, or the taxpayers?
I think it's the Republican Party and my
I don't think
concern.
it's never been my concern.
And presidential leadership that I want to provide in this area will bring it down. But we've got to get the Democrats' Congress under control. They do all the spending. They appropriate every dime and tell us how to spend every dime. I'd like to ask the governor to join me in getting for the president what 43 governors have, the line item veto. He has to operate in Massachusetts under a balanced budget proviso. I would like a balanced budget amendment. But the dynamics of the economy, we cut the taxes and revenues are up by 25% in 3 years. So the problem is, it's not that the working man is being taxed too little, or the person working out, the woman working in some factory being taxed too little. It is that we are continuing to spend too much. So my formula says grow at the rate of inflation, permit the president to set the priorities on where we do the spending. And remember, The federal deficit has come down $70 billion in 1 year, in 1987. And this year, Congress is doing a little better in controlling the growth of spending. Spending was only up something like 4%. So it isn't that we're taking too little from the taxpayer. We're spending too much still. And the formula I've given you works. We put it through a good economic model. We've got good economists on the West Coast, Michael Boskin.
They always say that.
Marty Feldstein.
You can hire anybody to say anything. If you even do that.
Massachusetts. And they agree that if we can do what I've said, we can get it down without going and softening
But they've been
the
saying
American
this too
taxpayer
since
once again.
JFK, both sides.
One more point on that.
The economists
let's learn
say
from
this.
history. A capital gains differential will increase jobs, increase risk-taking, increase revenues to the federal government.
Governor, you have a minute to rebut.
Well, I hope all of those Americans out there who are watching us, listening to us, and trying to make up their mind about which one of us ought to be President of the United States, listen to the Vice President very carefully. What he's proposing, after over $1 trillion in new debt, which has been added to the federal debt in the course of the past 8 years, an IOU that our children and grandchildren will be paying for years, is a tax cut for the wealthiest 1% of the people in this country, an average of about $30,000 that we're going to give to people making $200,000 a year. Why, that's more than the average teacher makes. We've had enough of that, ladies and gentlemen. We've run up more debt in the last 8 years than under all of the presidents from George Washington and Jimmy Carter combined. It's time for a chief executive who can make tough choices, can work with the Congress, can get that deficit down, and begin to build a strong fiscal foundation under this country.
All right, the next question will be asked by Ann Grower, and it will go to the Vice President. You have 2 minutes to answer, sir.
Mr. Vice President, you've said you want a kinder, gentler
Her fit is actually like
one that helps the less fortunate.
is
Today,
pretty 90s for the
37
80s.
million
I feel like.
Americans, including many
I kinda dig it, though.
families with aging parents and young children, cannot afford any health insurance.
No way you can
but
pull it
earn
off
too
now, I
much to
don't think,
qualify
but
for Medicaid.
I dig
What
it. I
will
love
you do
I
to
love like
provide
late
protection
80s,
for
90s
them,
clothes.
And how will you pay for it?
One thing I will not do
I keep forgetting it's
is
88,
suck
so.
every business in the country and thus throw some people out of work. I want to keep this economic recovery going. More Americans at work today than at any time in history, a greater percentage of the workforce. What I will do
Time to do our
is permit people to buy
regular
into
Googling
Medicaid.
of
I believe that's the answer. I am proud to have been part of an
what was the unemployment rate
that passed the first catastrophic health bill. And in that, there's some Medicaid some provisions that will be very helpful to the kind of people we're talking about here. But
Why does it always do
we've
that?
got to keep going forward without killing off the engine and throwing people out of work. So the answer lies, it seems to me,
unemployment declined to a 14-year low by mid-year.
Catastrophic program.
In
It
1988.
applies to me in flexibility in Medicaid, so people at the lowest end can buy in there and get their needs covered. And then it also, I do not want to see us mandate across the board that every company has to do this, because I really think that marginal operators are going to go say, we can't make it. And I think then you're going to see that people are put out of work. All these programs, and this costs on his, I saw an estimate, I'd love to know what he thinks, $35–40 billion. And it seems to me that
Can't find the exact
somebody
number,
pays
but
that. There isn't any such thing as something free out there. Either gets passed along as increased prices, or it gets passed along by people being put out of work so the business can continue to compete. So I think we ought to do it in the Medicaid system. I think we ought to do it by full enforcement of the catastrophic health insurance.
It was like 5.7%, 5.3 by December of 1988. But 1987 is 5.7.
Flexibility on private insurances.
It was at like 10% in 1982, so it did go down.
Rebuttal, Governor.
But George, that's no answer. You know,
It was 6% in 1979.
37 million people, most of the members of working families who don't have a dime of health insurance and don't know how to pay the bills if their kids get sick at night. I was in Houston on Tuesday meeting with a group of good citizens, working citizens, all of them with little or no health insurance. One of them was a father who had been laid off a few months ago and lost his health insurance, has an 11-year-old son, and can't let that son compete in sports in Little League because he's afraid he's going to get hurt and he won't be able to provide health insurance to pay those bills. My state just became the only state in the nation to provide for universal health care, and we did it with the support
That's
of the
true.
business community and labor and the healthcare community. And
Massachusetts does have like has a universal health care system.
The fact of
right?
the matter is that employers who today
I think Mitt Romney touted that during against Obama
because they're paying for those who aren't.
Because there was Obamacare and Romney wanted to do Romney Care, which was based off the Massachusetts
basic
system.
health security for all of the citizens of this country of ours.
Follow up, Ann?
Yes.
I don't know really the differences between the two,
Since
but
your Massachusetts health plan has been attacked by the Vice President and you have defended it in this way, I'd like to move on to perhaps one of the most costly medical catastrophes facing Americans today, and that is AIDS. At the end of September, the
finally AIDS being brought up.
Patients will lose their access to AZT, which is the only federally approved drug for treatment of the disease. Now, I'd like to know, sir, what your position is on extending that and what it is you think the government ought to be doing about making AZT and other drugs available to people who are
This is why we say, one of the reasons we say fuck
Let me
Ronald
just say
Reagan is because
before I answer your
the
question
AIDS
that
crisis.
I didn't know that the Vice President attacked our program in Massachusetts. I hope he hasn't, because it has won the support of a great many people all over the state, and I think it's a model for what I hope we can do across the country. But when I proposed my plan this past Tuesday, he or one of his spokesmen called it socialized medicine. The last time
God. You were saying it back then.
Phrase, I suspect he remembers it, don't you? It was in 1964, and that's what he called Medicare. Well, he was wrong then, and he's wrong now.
I'll say too, Medicaid was talked about a little bit in the other debates, not as much as I thought they would be. I know healthcare now is talked about ad nauseum, I feel like, in debates, especially in the Democratic primaries, when it was like, Bernie versus everyone else with Medicare for all. So it's just interesting to see a candidate talk about potentially bringing it nationally. But yeah, this talking point of socialized healthcare. So it's always used by the right. It's really not.
Excuse me, Governor, if I may interrupt at this point and caution the audience, as I did before we went on the air, please hold it down. You're only taking time away from your candidate when you do that. Governor, continue, please.
Let me say this about AIDS. It's the single most important public health crisis, the single most important public health emergency we've had in our lifetimes. And I think there are a number of things we have to do, including supporting legislation, which is now moving through the Congress, which will commit this nation to the resources to find a cure, which will provide broad education and prevention, which will provide sensitive and caring treatment for the victims of AIDS. I think we have to demonstrate some flexibility, and I think the FDA is attempting to do so now in trying to make it possible for new and experimental drugs to be available to the people who are at risk at AIDS. And I would hope that we could bring that kind of a policy to bear beginning in January, and I would encourage the current administration to proceed with that kind of flexibility where it's appropriate and where it's done carefully and responsibly. But we have not had the kind of leadership we should have had. In this particular area, I think the Vice President and I are in general agreement on what we have to do. The Special Federal Commission made good, solid recommendations. I think we're both supportive of them, and I would strongly lead in that area, as I have in my state as governor.
Mr. Vice President, a minute rebuttal.
Well, we're on the right track. The NIH is doing a good job in research. The Surgeon General is doing a good job in encouraging the proper kind of education. I noticed that the governor did not mention any testing, but we got to have a knowledge base. Testing should be confidential, but we have to have a knowledge base. We can't simply stick our heads in the sands in terms of testing. I'm chairman of the President's Task Force on Regulatory Relief, and we are working with the FDA, and they have sped up bringing drugs to market that can help. And you got to be careful here because there's a safety factor. But I think these things, and then also I am one who believes we've got to go the extra mile in being sure that that blood supply is pure. We cannot have a lack of confidence in the blood supply when it comes to operations and surgery and things of this nature. So research, speeding the drugs to market, testing, blood supply are very important elements of this.
Next question will be asked by Peter Jennings. It goes to the governor.
Evening, Mr. Vice President, Governor.
Peter?
Governor, one theme that keeps coming up about the way you govern, you've both mentioned leadership tonight, so I'd like to stay with that for a second. The theme that keeps coming up about the way you govern is passionless, technocratic.
Passionless?
Passionless, technocratic, the smartest clerk in the world.
Passionless?
Your critics maintain that in the 1960s your public passion was not the war in Vietnam or civil rights, but no-fault auto insurance. And they say that in the 1970s you played virtually no role in the painful busing crisis in Boston. Given the fact that a president must sometimes lead by sheer inspiration and passion, we need to know if this is a fair portrait of your governing, or is it a stereotype? And if it isn't fair, could you give us an example of where you have had that passion and
that's a tough question.
Leadership that sometimes a president needs?
Like an interview
Peter,
question.
I care deeply about people, all people, working families.
How would you describe your
people
passion
all over this
for the
country
job?
who, in some cases, are living from paycheck to paycheck. In other cases, are having a hard time opening up the door of college opportunity to their children. In other cases, don't have basic health insurance, which for most of us, we accept as a matter of course and assume we're going to have in order to pay the bills that we incur when we get sick. I'm somebody who believes deeply in genuine opportunity for every single citizen in this country, and that's the kind of passion I brought to my state. I was a leader in the civil rights movement in my state and in my legislature. I cared very deeply about that war in Vietnam. I thought it was a mistake. I thought it was wrong. And I was one of the few legislators early in that war that took a stand against the war. I think it was the right stand at the time, and I think history has proved us to be
I wonder
correct.
if that's even true. I feel like half the time it's not.
Over time. I served one term. I was defeated, as you know, and defeat sometimes is an important lesson. I think I'm a much better governor today. I think I'm a much better person, a much better listener. I think I'll be a much better president for having gone through that experience. But the things that we have done in my state to bring opportunity to people on public assistance, over 50,000 families on welfare that we've helped to move from welfare to work and to become productive citizens. The universal health care bill that we just talked about, which will guarantee health care for all of our citizens.
I mean, he escaped
the opening up of opportunity to
the Korean War
in my state,
draft.
affirmative action, minority contracting, the fact that we have a 3% unemployment rate and more jobs than people to fill them.
So I guess that's pretty base.
Gives us a tremendous opportunity to reach out to everybody and make them a part of this wonderful nation of ours.
But he did serve in the Army, though.
These are things that I believe
Which is
in
Swarthmore.
very deeply.
Okay.
I may be a little calmer than some about it. I may be a greater consensus builder these days than I used to be, and I think that's a good thing. But I'm running for the presidency of the United States. I've been in public service for 25 years because I believe deeply in American goals and values and in the people of this country, and that's the kind of president I want to be.
Mr. Vice President, a rebuttal?
Well, I don't question his passion. I question, and I don't question his concern about the war in Vietnam. He introduced or supported legislation back then that suggested that kids from Massachusetts should be exempt from going overseas in that war. Now, that's a certain passion, but in my view, it's misguided passion.
That's good,
we
I
have a
think.
big difference on issues. You
Defend
see,
your state's children?
last year in the primary, he
Or not your children, your,
expressed his passion.
he said
I am
children,
a
right?
strong liberal Democrat, August '87. Then he said, I am a card-carrying member of the ACLU. That was what he said. He is out there out of the mainstream. He is very passionate. My argument with the governor is, do we want this country to go that far left? And I wish we had time to let me explain, but I salute him for his passion. We just have a big difference on where this country should be led.
Imagine
and in what direction
saying
it ought
that
to go.
someone being in the ACLU is
Peter,
too far
Peter,
left.
Question for the Vice President, Peter.
I'd actually like to follow up, if I may, on this mention you've made of his card-carrying membership in the American Civil Liberties
But
Union.
yeah, who's saying with like,
You've
I think
used
it's
the phrase
pretty
card
good to
carrying
like stop,
so many times since Governor Dukakis first acknowledged that
you
he
know,
was a
people being
card-carrying member of
drafted
the
in
ACLU.
your state. I think that's good.
Some people have come to believe that you've used it to brand him in some way, to identify him as people were identified in the 1950s as less than patriotic. I'd like to know why you keep repeating the phrase. What's the important issue here? What is so wrong with the governor being a member of an organization which has come to the defense of, among other people, Colonel Oliver North?
Nothing's wrong with it. But
You
just
just
take
said
a
it was
look at
too
the
further
positions
left.
of the. Just take a look at the positions of the ACLU. But Peter, please understand, the liberals do not like me talking about liberal. They don't like it when I say that he says he's a card-carrying member. Now, if that quote was wrong, he can repudiate it right here. I've seen it authoritatively written twice, and if I've done him an injustice and he didn't say it, I'm very, very sorry. But I don't agree with most of the positions of the ACLU. I simply don't want to see
Which ones?
ratings on movies. I don't want my 10-year-old grandchild to go into a X-rated movie. I like those rating systems. I don't think they're right to try to take the tax exemption away from the Catholic Church. I don't want to see the kiddie pornographic laws repealed. I don't want to see under God come out from our currency. Now, these are all positions of the ACLU, and I don't agree with them.
Hold up. Bush, what are you saying? You don't want kiddie porn laws? Like, what is...
Very, very sorry.
What is he saying?
I don't agree with most of the positions of the ACLU. I simply don't want to see the ratings on movies. I don't want my 10-year-old grandchild to go into a X-rated movie. I like those rating systems. I don't think they're right to try to take the tax exemption away from the Catholic Church. I don't want to see the kiddie pornographic laws repealed. I don't want to see under God come out from our currency.
Oh, he's saying that they're repealing it.
Positions of the ACLU.
I don't agree with them. We obviously doubt that
to exercise his passion.
The ACLU wants to get rid of
a strong progressive liberal.
I'm sure there's
I don't agree with that.
A lot of political jargon going on right there.
I think I'm more in
political bullshit, I should say.
The mainstream of America.
Misconstruing.
They raised the same thing with me on the Pledge of Allegiance. You see, I'd have found a way to sign that bill. Governor Thompson of Illinois did. I'm not questioning his patriotism. He goes out and says, man is questioning my patriotism, and then all the liberal columnists join in. I am not. I am questioning his judgment on these matters, or where he's coming from. He has every right to do it, but I believe that's not what the American people want. And when he said at the convention, ideology doesn't matter, just competence, he was moving away from his own record, from what his passion has been over the years. And that's all I'm trying to do is put it in focus. And I hope people don't think that I am questioning his patriotism when I say he used his words to describe his participation in that organization.
Governor, response?
Well, I hope this is the first and last time I have to say this. Of course the Vice President's questioning my patriotism. I don't think there's any question about that. And I resent it. I resent it. My parents came to this country as immigrants. Oof. They taught me that this was the greatest country in the world. I'm in public service because I love this country.
I feel like there's a lot more bad blood between the two of them compared to the other candidates we've seen.
My patriotism, as the Vice President has now repeated.
There's some accusations here.
The fact of the matter is that if the Pledge of Allegiance was the acid test of one's patriotism, Vice President's been the presiding officer in the United States Senate for the past 7.5 years. To the best of my knowledge, he's never once suggested that a session of the Senate begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, shit. Get him.
Bush, I don't question your patriotism. When you're
attacked
for your military record, I immediately said that it was inappropriate, it had no place in this campaign, and I rejected it. And I would hope that from this point on, we get to the issues that affect the vast majority of Americans.
Some beef
jobs,
here, I'm telling you.
Health care, housing, the environment. Those are the concerns of the people that are watching us tonight, not labels that we attach to each other, questions about each other's patriotism and loyalty.
Time is up. Governor, let's go now to John Mashik again.
This is spicy, yo.
The Vice President.
Dude.
Mr. Vice President, in a debate.
These 4 years from Reagan to this, we had like the jokes, the boomer jokes. This is like, I'm telling you, there's some heat going on between them. There's some accusations of patriotism and just
during
competence.
The Republican primaries, you said most of the nation's homeless are suffering from mental illness, an assertion immediately challenged by one of your rivals. Estimates of the homeless range from a low of 250,000 by the government to around 3 million, including working families and their children. What commitment are you willing to make tonight to this voiceless segment of our society?
I want to see the McKinney Act fully funded. I believe that that would help in terms of shelter. I want to see, when I talked at our convention about 1,000 points of light, I was talking about the enormous numbers of shelters and organizations that help. The governor's wife, been very active in the homeless. My campaign chairman, Secretary Jim Baker's wife. This isn't government. These are people that care, that are trying to give of themselves. The government has a role. It is to fully fund the McKinney Act. There are certain Army bases that the Act calls for that can be used in certain cases to shelter people when it's rough. And so I think that we're on the right track. I don't see this, incidentally, as a Democrat or Republican or a liberal or conservative idea. I see an involvement by 1,000 points of light. I see the funding that is required, and I hope the Congress will fully fund this bill. They gave it a great deal of conscience and a great deal of work, and we're on the right track on this one. But look, mental, that was a little overstated it. I'd say around 30%. And I think maybe we could look back over our shoulders and wonder whether it was right to let all those mental patients out.
It was a federal law provide federal money for homeless shelter programs, but there was like
them because there is a major.
But there was like
a lot of them are mentally
strict
sick. We've got to attend to them. But fully,
strict caveats to it of like who can get money and stuff from it.
Well, this is another fundamental difference that I have with the Vice President. Just as I do in the case of health care for 37 million members of working families in this country who don't have health insurance. The problem, Mr. Bush, is that you've cut back by 90% on our commitment to affordable housing for families of low and moderate income. And when you do that, you have homeless families. We didn't have 2.5 million or 3 million homeless people living on streets and in doorways in this country 10 years ago. We've got to begin to get back to the business of building and rehabilitating housing for families of low and moderate income in this country. Housing for young families that they can look forward someday to buy. We've got communities in this country increasingly where our own kids can't afford to live in the communities that they grew up in. That's an essential commitment, and I think the housing community is ready. But it's going to take a president who's committed to housing, who's had experience in building and rehabilitating housing,
today,
who understands that affordable housing for families of low and moderate income, for young families, first-time home buyers, is an essential part of the American dream. And while I'm all for the McKinney bill, that by itself simply won't do. We've got to have a president that can lead on this issue, that can work with the Congress, and I'm prepared to do so. This is one of the most important priorities that faces this country.
John, a question for the governor.
Governor, you've mentioned the American dream of home ownership, and it's certainly become an impossible one for many of the young people of our nation who are caught up in this economic squeeze of the middle class, as you've said so frequently during the campaign. And yet, in spite of your answer just a few minutes ago, what promise can you realistically hold out to these people that with the costs of housing going up and with limited help available from Washington, are we destined to become a nation of renters?
Well, I certainly hope not, and it's all a question of what our priorities are. Mr. Bush talked about values. I agree with him. What are our values?
Got to rechange the McKinney-Vento Act, ensuring educational rights and protection for homeless children and youth.
First-time home buyers to own their own home someday, something that's part of the American dream? I think so. You know, back after World War II, when we had hundreds of thousands of GIs who came back from the war, we didn't sit around. We went out and built housing. The government was very much involved. So was the housing industry. So was the banking industry. So were housing advocates. So were nonprofit agencies. So were governors and mayors and people all over this country who believe deeply in home ownership and affordable housing. Now, that's the kind of leadership that I want to provide as President of the United States. This isn't a question of a little charity for the homeless. This is a question of organizing the housing community. I've talked to bankers and builders and developers, to housing advocates, to community development agencies, and they want leadership from Washington. Washington by
He's
itself
all for the McKinney bill, yeah.
We shouldn't expect that. But governors are ready, mayors are ready.
That just shows that, like,
builders and
it's around today. You know, there's
a funds, John. And
where was it? There's a National Center for Homeless Education that was talking about it. You know, still around today, but yeah, it's reauthorized in December 2015.
Well, that's a choice we have to make, isn't it? Do we spend money on that weapon system?
I'm reading this correctly.
In the billions and trillions, or is providing some decent and affordable housing for families
by Title IX Part A, actually.
Isn't at least as important and probably more so, because It's so essential to our
but it shows that, like,
to our future.
you know, there's still homelessness
That's the kind of
to this day.
presidency I believe
You know,
in.
so clearly,
Simply to say, well, the McKinney bill will
just
do it,
having a
just
one
do it.
law
We need the president who will lead on this issue, who's had experience on this issue,
systematically,
kind of
fix the problem.
priority that will be at the top of our list beginning in January of 1989.
A response, Mr. Vice
I think the
President.
governor is blurring housing and the homeless. Let's talk about housing, which the question was. When you talk to those bankers, did they discuss where interest rates were when your party controlled the White House?
Oh my fucking God.
10 days before I took the oath of office as president, they were 21.5%. Now, how does that grab you for increasing
Yeah, interest rates are
housing?
important, but like
Housing
if the
is
house
up.
is
We are serving a
$5
million
million
more families now, but we're not going to do it.
and the interest rate is
That old
1%,
Democratic
it
liberal
doesn't
way of
matter.
trying to build more bricks
If the
and mortars.
interest rate's
Go out and take a
0%,
look at St.
it's
Louis at
frickin'
some of
$5
that
million
effort. It
to
is
buy the
wrong.
house.
I favor home ownership. I want to see more vouchers. I want to see tenant control of some of these projects.
What do you mean, like
and
tenant
I want
unions?
to keep the interest rates down. They're half now of what they were when we came into office. And with my policy of getting this deficit under control,
Everyone's rent would be lower if we all had
they'll
tenant
be a lot
unions.
less. But if we spend and spend and spend, that is going to wrap up the housing market, and we'll go right back to the days of the misery index and malaise that President Reagan and I have
Which is
overcome.
hilarious because
Thank
his
God
son
for the United States on that one.
would be at the helm
next
when
question is to
the housing
governor,
market
and
crashes.
we'll ask.
Governor Dukakis, is there a conflict between your opposition to the death penalty and your support for abortion on demand, even though in the minds of many people that's also killing?
No, I don't think
We're
there is.
jumping
There are
from
two
housing
very
to
different
the
issues
death
here,
penalty
they've
and
got to be dealt with
abortion.
separately.
Great.
I'm opposed to the death penalty. I think everybody knows that. I'm also very
Just fire a
tough
gun
on
in the
violent
dirt
crime.
once a week, that'll lower your rent in the area. It's true.
And that's one of the reasons why my state has cut crime by more than any other industrial state in America. One of the reasons why
We're supposed to get our, we emailed about our lease because we were supposed to, we're supposed to know by the end of next week
program that is reaching out and helping youngsters all over our state. The kind
if we're
of thing
staying
I
here
want
or
to do
not.
as
So
President of the United States. You know, the
really hoping they don't
Vice
raise the
President says he
rent, and
wants
if they
to
do,
impose the death
it's
penalty
not
on
by much.
drug traffickers, and yet his administration has a federal furlough program.
I really don't
which
want to move.
is one of the most permissive in the country, and which gave last year 7,000 furloughs to drug traffickers and drug pushers, the same people that he says he now wants to execute. The issue of abortion is a very difficult issue.
It's not.
One that I think we all have to
I hate
wrestle
that.
with.
It's not giving the right,
Come to terms with.
the ability
I
to
favor
debate it.
abortion. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think most people do. The question is,
You say it's
who
complicated, and
makes
it gives
the
them
decision?
the space to be
And I
like
think
kind
it
of
has
right.
to be
You know what I
the
mean?
woman, in the exercise of her own conscience.
What's
and
up,
religious
Trollamore? How
beliefs,
you doing, bud?
that makes that decision.
Response, Mr. Vice President.
Well, the Massachusetts furlough program was unique. It was the only one in the nation that furloughed murderers who had not served enough time to be eligible for parole. The federal program doesn't do that. No other state programs do that. And therefore, and I favor the death penalty.
Yeah, no
I know it's
shit. You're in
tough.
fucking Texas.
Honest people can disagree, but when a narcotics wrapped up guy goes in and murders a police officer, I think they ought to pay with their life. And I do believe it would be inhibiting. And so I am not going to furlough
This debate's been
men
very
like
good.
Willie Horton. And I
There
would
is some
meet
actual
with
beef
their-
between 'em, I
the
think.
victims of his last escapade.
There was accusations of patriotism and competency earlier.
In Maryland. Maryland would not extradite Willie Horton, the man who was furloughed.
Yeah,
the
'cause
murderer,
Maryland's better than
because they
Texas.
didn't want him to be furloughed again. And so we have a fundamental difference on this one, and I think most people know my position on the sanctity of life.
Bush was saying
I favor
since
adoption.
Dukakis
I
was
do
part of
not
the
favor
ACLU, that like
Question
that
for the
means
Vice
he's
President, ma'am.
not competent.
Mr. Vice President, I'd like to stay with abortion for just a moment,
Right.
if I might. Over the years, you have
Right, Ethan.
expressed several positions while opposing nearly all forms of government payment for it. You now say that you support abortion only in cases of rape, incest, or threat to a mother's life, and you also support a constitutional amendment that, if ratified, would outlaw most abortions. But if abortions were to become illegal again, do you think that the women who defy the law and have them anyway, as they did before it was okayed by the Supreme Court, and the doctors who perform them should go to jail?
I haven't sorted out the penalties, but I do know I do know that I oppose abortion, and I favor adoption. And if we can get this law changed,
this hasn't aged well. No, because they've been fucking attacking it since it was passed.
To take these kids that are unwanted and sometimes aborted, let them come to.
And I blame the Democrats.
Then put them in a family where they'll be.
Like I said, just even saying it's a difficult conversation gives more power to the right. It's not a difficult conversation.
In favor of life. And I have had a couple of exceptions that I support: rape, incest, and the life of the mother. Sometimes people feel a little uncomfortable talking about this, but it's much clearer for me now, as I've seen abortion sometimes used as a birth control device, for heaven's sakes. See the millions of these killings.
Fuck off, dude.
Accumulate. And
I can guarantee you, the Bush.
We certainly do.
Someone in the Bush family's had an abortion. They always all have. That's the thing.
And
that's the thing.
Illegality is established, then we can come to grips with the penalty side. And of course, there's got to be some penalties to enforce the law, whatever they may be.
Governor?
Well, I think what the Vice President is saying is that he's prepared to brand a woman a criminal for making this decision. As simple as that. I don't think it's
better
enough
answer
to come before the American people who are watching us tonight and say, well, I haven't sorted it out. This is a very, very difficult and a fundamental decision that all of us have to make. And what he is saying, if I understand him correctly, is that he's prepared to brand a woman a criminal for making this choice.
I just said
I think that's, no, let me finish.
Yeah, sure.
Let me
I'm telling you,
I think
dude.
it has to be the woman in the exercise of her own conscience and religious beliefs that makes that decision. And I think that's the right approach, the right decision, and I would hope by this time that Mr. Bush had sorted out this issue and come to terms with it, as I have. I respect his right to disagree.
Yeah, we'll get more into the what was happening. I mean, we read a little bit about the primaries leading up to this.
Peter Jennings, a question.
We'll read after the debates of how it kind of all fell.
Your discussion.
Obviously, Bush had a pretty big landslide. Republicans were just crushing
your
it.
Own phrase that you are haunted by the lives which children in our inner cities live. And certainly the evidence is compelling. There's an explosion of single-parent families. And by any measure, these single-parent families, many with unwanted children, are the source of poverty, school dropouts, crime, which many people in the inner city simply feel is out of control. If it haunts you so, why, over the 8 years of the Reagan-Bush administration, have so many programs designed to help the inner cities been eliminated or cut?
And one of the reasons, and I first would like to know which programs you're talking about, and then we could talk on the merits of the programs. But you see, my fundamental philosophy is give local and state government as much control as possible. That might be the explanation if you tell me the program. I do strongly support the WIC program. I think it is good. I think part of the answer to this haunting of these children that are out there and suffering lies in extension of Medicaid to challenge the states, and maybe we're going to have to enforce more on the states in terms of Medicaid taking care of these. But Peter, so much of it gets into a whole other phase of things. The neighborhood, the kind of environment people are growing up in, and that leads me to the programs I'm talking about in terms of education.
Right.
I think part of it is the crime-infested neighborhoods, and that's why I'm a strong believer in
war on drugs.
Why I was so pleased to be endorsed
we get it, Bush.
by the policemen on the beat, the Boston Police Department the other day. I think they understand my commitment to helping them in the neighborhoods.
More
and
police.
So
we hate black people.
It's a combination of these things, but do not erode
no
out
weed.
of the system the 1,000 points of light. The people that are out there trying to help these kids, the programs like Cities in Schools, the work that Barbara Bush is doing so people can learn to read in this country and then go on and break this cycle of poverty.
It's a weird thing. Usually people just say my wife.
I've already made a proposal, and yes, it'll cost some money, but I favor that.
Yeah, he was in the
So these
92
are the
debates, yeah.
combination
We're going to have
and the
a
fact
three-person
that I don't
debate
think
in the
the
next
federal
chunk.
government can endorse a
I'm looking forward to that.
$35 billion program
$1 billion.
does not mean I have less compassion than the person who endorses such a program.
Those are first billions.
Well,
in this
I must
debate.
have been living through a different 8 years from the one that the
Only,
Vice President's been living
it's
through,
pretty,
because this administration
actually,
has
yeah,
cut and
47
slashed
minutes
and
to get to the
slashed
first
programs
billions.
for children,
Usually they say in the first
nutrition,
sentence.
for the kinds of things that can help these youngsters to live better lives. Has cut federal aid to education, has cut Pell Grants and loans to close the door to college opportunity on youngsters all over
I
this
wish
country.
someone would cut my Pell Grants.
And that, too, is a major difference between the Vice President and me.
Still
Let me just
waiting
give
on
you
that,
another
Joe.
Example. We have a great many people, hundreds of thousands of people living on public assistance in this country. The 50 governors of this nation have proposed to the Congress that we help those families to get off of welfare, help those youngsters, help their mothers to become independent and self-sufficient. It's taken months and months and months to get Mr. Bush and the administration to support that legislation, and they're still resisting. Now, that's the way you help people. Being haunted, 1,000 points of light, I don't know what that means. I know what strong political leadership is.
He has charisma. The Democrats needed some charisma, and they finally got someone.
Cut and slashed and butchered.
Because the last like
kids all over
3 chunks of debates,
Question,
Carter and
Peter.
Mondale were
The crisis
not
is no less
heavy
crisis
swingers.
for you if you were elected president. Where would you get the money
It's always the
to
question.
devote to the inner cities, which is clearly
Dude, just
needed?
we make money. We're the
Can
government.
you be specific about the programs not only you'd reinstate, but the
Who
more
cares?
imaginative ones?
That's always my thing. Who cares?
begin.
Make money. Who cares?
Well, I said a few minutes ago,
Money is
Peter,
fake.
that you can improve the lives of families and youngsters and save money at the same time. Welfare reform is one way to do it. If we invest in job training, in child care for those youngsters, in some extended health benefits so that that mother and her kids don't lose their health benefits when she goes to work, we can help literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of families to get off of welfare, to become independent and self-sufficient.
Or we can
To be
abolish capitalism.
tax-paying citizens and to improve their lives, the quality of lives,
We
their
wouldn't even need
futures
money.
and the futures of those children.
Yeah, the Boston
That's
accent
just
does
one
leak out.
example
Yeah.
of how you can save money.
I wish he would
and
embrace it
improve
more.
the quality of life at the same time.
Maybe they're afraid they
In
would
my
turn.
own state, for example.
Well,
we
maybe he
now
just doesn't
that
have it as
universal
much
healthcare
because
system.
it's not.
Vice President opposes, I think, very unwisely.
But
One
if
of
he's
the
hiding it,
greatest
I'm
barriers
disappointed.
to opportunity for a family and for those children.
We must do
is
it
the
because
threat
it's
that they
hard.
may lose
I'm
their health
JFK.
insurance. Think about that father down there in Houston who has to tell his youngster that he can't play
Mass
Little
hole
League
for
ball,
Prez,
he can't
please.
go
Yeah,
on that
fuck
ball
it. Why
field
not?
Because he's afraid he's going to get hurt. And yet, Mr. Bush says, well, I don't think we ought to expect businesses to provide health insurance.
I mean, Bernie's kind of like a weird accent too, because he has Vermont. He's a little bit of Chicago.
In this country do and are paying more for their insurance to reimburse hospitals for free care on account of people that are not employed, that are not insured, that have to go to that hospital. So these are the ways that.
Yeah, he also
you
has
help
Brooklyn in him.
Families, you help youngsters to live
I
better
mean, he's mostly
lives,
Brooklyn, but I think he
more
has a little bit
decent
of
lives.
just
We're ready to go
that
to work
whole
at the state and
region.
local level, all of us. I know the private
And then you have a
sector
little bit of
is people all
Chicago
over
in
the
there because
country,
he
but
went
it
to
takes
school there.
presidential leadership.
But it's mostly Brooklyn. You're
It
right.
takes a commitment.
But I think a lot of people
being
from
involved
Vermont
in the
talk
leading.
have a
That's
similar
the kind of
accent to like
presidency I wanna lead.
New England area.
Vice President.
What troubles me
remember
is
correctly.
that when I talk of
I've
the
never been.
voluntary sector and 1,000 points of light and 1,000 different ways to help on these problems, the man has just said he doesn't understand what I'm talking about.
probably just talking on my ass,
And this is
but-
the problem I have with the big spending liberals. They think the only way to do it is for the federal government to do it all. The fact happens to be that education
people like clap to that? I don't
spending
get it.
is up by the federal government. It is up. It is not down.
He just
The
talked
federal-
about
but
how we
here's the
need the
point he
federal
misses.
government to
The
like
federal
go after
government
states that
spends
aren't doing the
7% of the
programs
total money on
correctly.
education.
How is that any
And
different than
rest of
the
state
federal government
governments and local
funding
governments
something?
And the 1,000 points of light.
'Cause how are you gonna
And I'm
enforce
talking about
something?
Private schools and private church schools and things of
That
this
doesn't
nature
involve money.
Are putting up 93%.
What are you gonna, like, send them an email?
But the federal spending for education is up. And I want
Or
to
I guess
be
back
the
then, send them a
education
letter.
president because I want to see us do better. We're putting more money per child into education, and
Yeah,
we are
like
not
if you believe in
performing as we should.
our
We've
system,
gotten away
that it how
from
it
the
works.
values and the fundamentals. And I would like to
If
urge
the idea is
school
the federal government
superintendents,
just
the
doesn't
others
spend
around
money,
the
why
country,
have it at all?
to stand up now and keep us moving
Or why
forward
doesn't
on
that
a path
apply to
toward
the
real
Department of
excellence. And we
Defense
can do it.
or the
But
military?
It's not going to be dictated by some federal bureaucracy in Washington, D.C.
Mute his mic.
All right, let's move now to some questions on foreign and national security policy. John
Okay, here we
Nelson
go.
will ask the first question of the governor.
Governor, the Vice President continually refers to your lack of experience, weakness, naivete on foreign policy and national security matters. He says you are prepared to eliminate weapon systems that will result in the unilateral disarmament of this country. Is that true?
Of course not. Of course, that's a charge that's always made against any governor who runs for the presidency. I think it was one of the things Mr. Bush said about Mr. Reagan back in 1980. Remember that, George? And yet some of our
I'm telling you,
he
has some zingers.
Strongest international leaders were governors: Franklin Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Theodore Roosevelt. It's not the amount of time you spend in Washington. It's not the length of your resume. It's your strength. It's your values. It's the quality of the people you pick. It's your understanding of the forces of change that are sweeping the world, and whether or not you're in a position to provide leadership to make those forces of change work for us and not against us. Vice President has a long resume, but it didn't stop him from endorsing the sale of arms to the Ayatollah. And we now know that he was not out of the loop. He was in meeting after meeting after meeting, listening to Secretary Shultz and Secretary Weinberger opposing that, and yet he supported it. His experience didn't prevent him
His son did 9/11.
Participating or involving or in some way being involved in
that should explain enough.
Relationship between this government and Mr. Noriega and drug trafficking in Panama. He went to the Philippines in the early 80s and commended Ferdinand Marcos for his commitment to democracy. And he continues to support a failed policy in Central America, which is getting worse and worse, and which has in fact increased Cuban and Soviet influence in that region. So I don't believe that the fact that you've got that long resume or had that experience is the real question. The question is values, the question is strength, the question is your willingness to provide the kind of leadership that must be provided.
Cooking,
I'm ready to provide that leadership. I want to be the commander-in-chief of this country. I think it takes fresh leadership now and an understanding of those forces of change to provide the kind of strength that we need, and perhaps the Vice President can explain what he was doing when he supported the trading of arms to a terrorist nation and his involvement in Panama and that endorsement of Mr. Marcos, but
just call him a war criminal. That's what we need.
It's strength, it's values.
That's what we need. We need someone to run for president who just calls every other guy a war criminal.
Governor is for a nuclear freeze that would have locked in a
oh shit,
Soviet
57 people.
Nuclear force weapons,
DJ Mule.
Zero for the West, and because we didn't listen
to
these advocates and strengthen the defenses of this country, we now have the first arms control agreement in the nuclear
I'll
age.
pause this.
Now
I forgot how long that raid notification is. Hello, welcome. Oh shit. Human together strong. Thanks for the follow. Thank you. Whew. Just got a big adrenaline bomb right there. Oh shit. No, thanks for the raid. How is the rest of the farming and not farming, plants stream? I guess farming. Hello. Yeah, we're watching debates. Yeah, welcome to the stream. My name's Devin. We're doing a series from June to July, hoping to push us right into the Republican primaries. We're watching every presidential debate because I'm a little crazy. Banana plants? Hell yeah. Yeah, I was catching part of it because I was watching at the end of work, and then I got out early, showered, and I was like, oh, let me see if I can knock out a debate because I'm going camping this weekend, so I'm trying to keep on pace here because we have 35 total debates to do, and I think this is number 10 or 11. We got a good chunk, but they're going to get longer, more painful. But yeah, we're in 1988 right now, so we're watching all of them in chronological order. We started with 1916 with JFK and Nixon. And I guess the goal with this is to see if like, has the debates changed in any way? Have like policies changed in the parties in any way? Are debates even have the same effect on people anymore? Are debates, like I think nowadays debates, at least presidential debates, our theory is, at least my theory is, I guess you say, is that they help energize the current base, but doesn't really like change the vote for the independent voter. I still think in 1988, because it's been shown with like how dominant Reagan was in the Electoral College, when I think a lot more in the 80s, people were kind of just independent and would kind of vote depending on the presidential candidate. But oh, by the way, I did say at the top stream, some of these debates might have the presidential candidates or maybe the panelists might say questions or comments that might use language that isn't politically correct now. So just warning for that. There's been some talk about the war on drugs already in this one, because this is 1988 prime war on drugs era. There's also been talk about the AIDS crisis as well a little bit. We're doing international issues now, it sounds like. So probably a lot of anti-communist rhetoric. But yeah, this is the first of the Bush versus Dukakis debate. And you've probably never heard of Dukakis because he got destroyed in the Electoral College. But we're still watching it. And so far, Dukakis is kind of cooking a little bit. I'm not much of a... I'm not a liberal by any means, but he has the most charisma we've seen from a Democrat in the last 20 so years. Probably right behind JFK. No one's made the Bush versus Dukakis joke. No. All right, we're going to continue along. I want to keep powering through this, but appreciate the raid, Mule. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. You're the best. Hope you all enjoy this. It's pretty chill. We're pretty chill here. We're just kind of vibing with this, but
we're sitting down and talking to the Soviets about strategic arms, and he wants to do away with the midget man and the MX, the modernization of our nuclear.
They're talking about nuclear missiles.
That's not the way you deal with the Soviets.
I need a shout out thing.
Met Mr. Shevardnadze and talked substance.
I'm slacking on the Nightbot stuff.
These people are tough, but now
go follow DJ Mule.
If we have the experience to know how to handle it, but please do not go back to the days when the military was as weak as they could be, when the morale was down, and when we were the laughingstock around the world. And now we are back because we have strengthened the defenses of this country. And believe me, I don't want to see us return to those days. As to Ferdinand Marcos, is he in there anymore? It was under our administration that Mrs. Aquino came in, but I'll tell you what I was thinking.
Also, everyone should check out my Dragon Ball
mission. My last one was over Manila.
Sparkling water
fighting against imperialism.
That I got at H Mart.
And he had just lifted martial law, and he had just called for new elections. And all of those things happened because...
But yeah, hello everybody. There's a lot of new chatters here, so hello.
And Mr. Vice President. Out he goes.
Mr. Vice President, your time is up. John, a question for the Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, the governor has suggested that you've never met a weapons system that you didn't like or want. Are you prepared to tell the voters one system in this time of tight budgetary restraints and problems at the Pentagon that you'd be willing to cut or even eliminate that wouldn't endanger national security?
I don't think it's a question.
Yeah, there's been a lot of
I can tell him some I'm against.
A lot of military advancement talk the last 10 years. This is the 88 campaign,
There's plenty of them that I oppose. But what I am not going to do...
This is George H.W. Bush, by the way, not George Bush, not George W. Bush,
how we achieve a 50%
his son.
Reduction in our
this is his
weapons.
father,
I'm not going to give away
who's also, you got Jeb Bush as well
tough card game.
in the family, which is our favorite Bush, right?
Under me, when I lead this country... The Secretary of Defense is going to have to make the choices between how we keep,
what's a good
protect
punk band?
Is
it Husker?
Of our nuclear weapons. We are going to
Husker
make some
the
changes
band
and
name?
some tough choices before we go to deployment on the Midget Man missile or on the Minute Man, whatever it is. We're going to have to, the MX, we're going to have to do that. It's Christmas.
It's Christmas.
It's Christmas. Wouldn't it be nice to be perfect? Wouldn't it be nice to be the Iceman so you never make a mistake? These are the
Husker Du is the band name? Okay.
My answer
I'm named
is
after
do
something from
not
Battlestar
make these unilateral
Galactica.
cuts.
Gotcha.
And everybody now realizes that peace through strength works.
I'll have to check them out.
And so this is where I have a big
I once in a while will
difference.
dabble with
Of course
punk.
we're gonna have to make
I'm more of a
some
metal guy, but
determination on this, and we're going to have to make it on conventional forces. But now we've got a
yeah.
very
But also
good
we'll get Desert
concept
Storm.
Competitive strategies.
Yeah.
We will do what we do best. It's a strategy that we've been working on for a couple of years. It is going to take us to much better advantage in conventional forces.
I know this.
That's happened before, where it does this like weird transition, but then we'll never see it again. I wonder if that's a commercial break. That's got to be. That's the only thing I can think of. But it'd be weird to have one commercial break.
We've piled up over $1 trillion in debt. And the next
but shout out to PBS, and sorry for no closed captions. If someone knows a closed captions extension that can work for browsers, let me know.
The administration was opposed to the midget man.
I keep forgetting to look it up.
Table in Geneva suggesting that we ban mobile missile systems entirely. But those are the choices the next president of the United States is going to have to make. I'm for the stealth. I'm for the D5. I'm for going ahead with the advanced cruise missile.
When they say stealth, are they talking about like the stealth bomber?
I don't think we need them to remain strong.
I wonder if that's what they're talking about.
Move ahead with the strategic arms negotiation process with a comprehensive test ban treaty and
looks like a
negotiations leading to conventional force
like a batarang
with deeper cuts on the Soviet side, and Senator Benson and I will.
And it's all black. They like. It's like almost invisible on radar or whatever.
Well, Mr. Vice President, you said you met with Secretary General Gorbachev. You have met with Mr. Shevardnadze. But for the last 40 years, Americans have been taught to regard the Soviet Union as the enemy. Yet President Reagan has signed 2 arms control treaties, and he's promised to share Star Wars technology with the very country he once called the evil empire. So perhaps you could tell us this evening, should we be doing a lot to help?
I think this is 1 year after Reagan went to the Berlin Wall, by the way, just for context. I'm pretty sure. I think it was 87.
Economics and the social development of
Star Wars tech. We sent them AT-ATs.
What I think we ought to do is take
Star Destroyers, you name it.
And Glasnost, welcome them, but keep our eyes open. Be cautious, because the Soviet change is not fully established.
Who is he
yet.
telling that
yes,
to? Like, be cautious.
It's fine to do business with them, but I don't want to see
you know what I mean?
exporting our
like, what is me, an average American, gonna do? Like, what do I have to look out for in my day-to-day about the Soviets?
I don't want to see us making unilateral cuts in our strategic systems while we are negotiating with them.
Like, I feel like that's your job.
I'm encouraged by what I see when I talk to what I hear when I talk to Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Shevardnadze. But can they pull it off? And when did
Gorbachev get the Pizza Hut? When was that? Does anyone remember when that is?
China started to do the changes in China since Barbara
I feel like that was
lived there
probably like 1990, right?
Amazing in terms of incentive and partnerships and things of this nature. And now the Soviet Union seems
like
to
that
be
commercial
walking down that same path. We should encourage that. We ought to say this
like that
is
Russian
good.
commercial
where
they're talking about Pizza Hut.
I am not going to make unilateral cuts in our strategic defense systems or support some freeze when they have superiority. I'm not going to do that, because I think the jury is still out on the Soviet experiment. And the interesting place, one of the things that fascinates me about this perestroika and glasnost is what's going to happen in Eastern Europe.
Right. Yeah, of course, honey. Yeah, honey vinegar reality.
Poland today.
Yeah.
And I think we have enormous opportunity for trade. I don't want to go back to the Carter grain.
What we're doing is self-defense, though. You got to remember. The U.S. is participating in self-defense. That is not
a political tool like our predecessors.
We are innocent.
But this is an exciting time.
They started
all I'm
it.
suggesting is let's not be naive in dealing with the Soviets and make a lot of unilateral cuts, hoping against hope that they will match our bid. Look at the INF Treaty. And if we haven't learned from the negotiating history on that, we'll never learn. The freeze people were wrong. The Reagan-Bush administration was right. Excuse me.
Governor Dukakis. It was a very different George Bush who was talking much more sympathetically about the freeze in the spring of.
I like how they call him George Bush now. Probably was when George W. Bush ran. They started saying George H.W.
There's
right?
no time for partisan demagoguery. Nobody is suggesting that we unilaterally disarm or somehow reduce our strength.
We are not going to reduce the nukes.
What we're talking about is a combination of a strong and effective.
All 500 of them, we won't do it.
Strong, well-equipped,
don't you worry.
Well-maintained conventional forces, and at the same time a willingness to move forward steadily, thoughtfully, cautiously.
Remember when the U.S. almost bombed North Carolina?
The Soviet Union. We have
very fundamental
differences about human rights.
I think that was in the 70s.
Democracy, and in our basic system, our basic view of human beings and of what life is all
about. The U.S.
about.
almost set off a nuke in North Carolina because they were transporting a nuclear missile by plane. And something happened to the plane and it crashed. And it was like 3 out of the 4
peaceful world, and we can do so
3 out of the 4 like systems to stop it from blowing up.
that our national security
were
and our
like
economic
didn't work or
security go
something
hand
like
in
that.
hand. We
Like
cannot
it was
be
really
strong
close to just
militarily when
nuking
we're teeter-tottering on
North
top
Carolina.
of a mountain of debt which has been created in the past 8 years. That's why we need a Democratic administration in Washington.
I forgot what the name of it was.
A question for the governor.
Yes. Governor Dukakis, speaking of seeming changes of position, you have gone from calling the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars, a fantasy and a fraud, to saying recently you would continue SDI research and might even deploy the system if Congress supported such a move. Why the change of heart?
No, there's been no change of heart. I've said from the beginning that we ought to continue research into the strategic system.
They almost blew up Las Vegas, too?
In 1983.
What?
That's about $1 billion a year. But I don't know of
that would have
any
been,
reputable scientists who believe that this system, at least as originally conceived, could possibly work. This notion of some kind of a astrodome over ourselves.
My brother lives in Vegas currently. Well, he's moving, but
makes
Las Vegas never existed. I wonder where he would have lived.
Now talking about is
where would people gamble?
Very different from the one that was originally proposed in 1983. So I'm for continued research.
Yeah.
But
North Carolina nuke thing is like,
now, the other day,
I don't know why it's like, I found that out recently. Like, it should be talked about more.
Cut someplace. He hasn't told us where. We know where they're cutting. We know where you're cutting right now.
Especially after like the Ohio East Palestine, or East Palestine, sorry, derailment there. It's like, I'm scared now.
Said that pretty soon we'd have airplanes without engines.
Seems like
tank commanders who can't drive
transporting things in this country is very dangerous.
Coast Guard cutters tied up at the dock this summer, not patrolling. They're supposed to be our first line of defense against drugs and the war against drugs, because they don't
war
have
against
enough
drugs
fuel.
again. God damn it.
You have to make choices. We're not making those choices. And to spend billions and billions of dollars,
billions and billions
Bush
of dollars,
apparently wants to, although he himself has been all over the lot on this issue lately. On Star Wars, in my judgment, makes no sense at all. We need a strong, credible, effective nuclear deterrent. We have 13,000 strategic nuclear warheads right now on land, 14,000, enough to blow up the Soviet Union 40 times over. They have.
Thank God, right? Thank God we can.
Move forward with those negotiations, get the level of strategic weapons down.
We should blow them up a 41st time, just to be sure.
This system makes no sense at all, and I think Mr. Bush has been reconsidering his position over the course of the past few weeks. At least that's what I read.
We're going to push Bush left.
Where he stands on it tonight.
Mr. Vice President.
I'm now reconsidering my position. Two questions. How do you deter nuclear attack without modernizing our nuclear forces when the Soviets are modernizing? And how come you willing to spend a dime on something that you consider a fantasy and a fraud? Those are two rhetorical questions. He is the man on conventional forces that wants to eliminate two-carrier battle groups. The armed forces, the conventional forces of the United States, have never been more ready. Every single one of the Joint Chiefs will testify to the fact.
Yeah, I was born in '95, and like,
and secondly,
watching all these, it's kind of eerie. I guess is the best way I would describe it.
So please help us with that. Who cut
like just
$70
seeing,
million from the Coast
like they were talking about abortion
He's got to get
earlier,
this
and they've been
more
talking
clear.
about it since
Why do you
Jimmy Carter.
$1 billion on something
that's when
you
Roe
think
v. Wade
is a
was,
fantasy
you know,
and a fraud?
passed.
I will fully research it, go forward as fast as we can. We've set up the levels of funding, and when it is deployable,
and Bush was basically Bush and also Reagan both suggested that maybe women should be put in jail at the very least for getting abortions.
Try to give you one. Somewhere in the Middle
And
East
it's just,
tonight,
wow, we
9
haven't
Americans
changed, huh?
Are being held hostage. If you are commander,
They talked about Medicare too earlier, like a Medicare for all system in Massachusetts, and Bush called it socialized medicine. Like that talking point's still a thing.
The United States government must never negotiate with terrorists. And if any Americans are held hostage and you become president, to what lengths would you go to rescue them?
Peter, it's one of the most agonizing decisions a president has to make. These are
history repeating itself, or even just like history. Have things really changed that much? You know what I mean? Like there's been some good, obviously.
But if there's one thing we also
there's been a lot of bad too, and I don't know if it's gotten actually better.
Make concessions to terrorists, ever, ever, because if you do, it's an open invitation to other terrorists.
Here's like early war on terror too, right here. On both sides.
That's the tragedy of the Iran-Contra scandal. As a matter of fact, Mr. Bush was the chairman of a task force on international terrorism, which issued a report shortly before that decision was made and said, and rightly so, that we never ever can make concessions to terrorists and hostage takers. And yet, after sitting through meeting after meeting, he endorsed that decision, endorsed the sale of arms to the Ayatollah in exchange for hostages. One of the most tragic, one of the most mistaken foreign policy decisions we've ever made in this country, and I dare say encouraged others to take hostages, as we now know. So there can be no concessions under any circumstances, because if we do, it's an open invitation to others.
In the 80s, like everyone was getting taken hostage, I feel like.
We've got to treat it as international crime. We've got to attack it at all points.
If you were a diplomat or anything in another country, I just feel like you're just always getting kidnapped. At least the way they always talk about it. I know there was the Iran hostage crisis there with under Carter.
And we can give no
that was the big one.
It was
like over a year.
Terrorism. Yes, we should make every effort to try to help those hostages come home, but it can never be because we make concessions. That was a tragic mistake that we made, a mistake that Mr. Bush made and others made, and it should never, ever be made again.
Mr. Vice President.
I wrote the anti-terrorist report for this government. It is the best anti-terrorist report written. Yes, we shouldn't trade arms for hostages, but we have made vast improvements in our anti-terrorism. Now, it's fine to say that sometimes you have to hit base camps, but when the president saw the state-sponsored fingerprints of Muammar Gaddafi on the loss of American life, he hit Libya. And my opponent was unwilling to support that action. And since that action, terrorist action against the United States citizens have gone down. And I have
This is the first debate where they're interrupting each other, too.
Matter. And I've said mistakes were made. Clearly, nobody's going to think the president started out thinking he was going to trade arms for hostages. That is a very serious charge against the president. That matter's been thoroughly looked into. But the point is, sometimes the action has to be taken by the federal government. And when we took action, it had a favorable response.
We saw the polls. We did a straw poll to see if people would like it or not. They said yeah.
Make the point that you've campaigned vigorously as part of a leadership team. But so far you won't tell the American
That's how I always imagine they do.
What
they do it. They just they poll like 10 people and they're like, "Do you like this? Yeah, okay."
And what should have been done?
Or they don't ask anybody.
The hostages. To the best of my knowledge, there's no constitutional requirement which prevents you from doing so. Jimmy Carter urged his Vice President Walter Mondale to tell
the boo juice is all gone.
Would you now ask President Reagan for permission?
This one was good though.
To tell the American people what advice you did give him. And if you don't,
I have a Goku one that's vanilla.
Your judgment in the Oval Office in the last 8 years.
This one was peach.
You judge by the whole record. You judge by the entire record. Are we closer to peace? Are we doing better in anti-terrorism? Should we have listened to my opponent who wanted to send the UN into the Persian Gulf? Or in spite of the mistakes of the past, are we doing better there? How is our credibility with the GCC countries on the western side of the Gulf? Is Iran talking to Iraq about peace? You judge on the record. Are the Soviets coming out of Afghanistan? How does it look in a program he called phony or some one of these marvelous Boston adjectives up there and about Angola? Now we have a chance. Now, several Bostonians don't like it, but the rest of the country will understand. Now we have a chance.
Oh my God. I hate it.
Now we have a chance. Now we have a chance. And so
charisma wins you elections, 110%.
I leave it right there and say that you judge.
You just got to have good jokes. Got to be on your feet.
All he can talk about, he goes around ranting about Noriega. Now I've told you.
Reagan was all boomer humor, and Bush is just all zingers.
He can talk about Iran-Contra, and I'll make a deal with you. I will take all the blame for those two incidents if you give me half the credit for all the good things that have happened in world peace since Ronald Reagan and I took over from the Carter administration. And Peter, I still have a couple of minutes left, and there is a different principle here on confidence.
Sorry, Mr. Vice President.
It's only on yellow here. Wait a minute. Come on.
Sorry. I'm wrong. Go ahead. My apologies.
I like how they're using like.
You said nobody's perfect.
I hate it. Stop having fun with him. He's a war criminal.
Where was I?
Stop it.
Apologies.
25th of December, Mr. Vice President.
I agree.
You're helping him out.
I agree.
You're supposed to be unbiased.
I finished.
Governor.
It's all fun and
You can
games
have
up
another
here.
10 seconds if he wants, Jim.
No, yes, sir.
Okay.
Go ahead. All
Go
right.
ahead.
All right. Governor, you have a minute to respond.
I hate it. I hate
Well,
it.
the matter of judgment is very important. And I think it's important to understand what happened here. A report on international terrorism, chaired by the Vice President, was released and made some very specific recommendations about how to deal with terrorism. They were ignored. The Vice President ignored them. He says mistakes were made. Very serious mistakes in judgment were made. He says, well, let's concede that the administration has been doing business with Noriega, and has made him a part of our foreign policy, and has been funneling aid to the Contras who convicted drug dealers. I think those are very, very serious questions of judgment, which those of you who are watching us here tonight have a right to judge and review. We're not going to make those kinds of mistakes. You cannot make concessions to terrorists. If you do, you invite the taking of more hostages. That's a basic principle. It was ignored in that case, and it was a very, very serious mistake.
See, it sucks because he's trying to be serious, and then like
Go to a question from
Bush was just
John
laughing
Mashik,
about,
who goes to the
oh, how
Vice
much
President.
time do I have left?
Mr.
Oh, I
Vice
don't have any
President,
time.
Democrats
Oh,
and
never
even
mind, I
some
don't need it.
Republicans are still expressing reservations about the
Like he wins that
qualifications
just
and
because of
credentials
he made the crowd
Senator
laugh.
Dan Quayle of Indiana,
You humanized
your
him.
chosen running mate, to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. What do you see in him that others do not?
I see a young man that was elected to the Senate twice, to the House of Representatives twice.
I hate this question.
I see a man who
They've asked
is
this
young,
before.
and I'm putting my confidence in a whole generation of people that are in their 30s and in their 40s. I see a man that took the leadership in the Job Training Partnership Act, and that
Reagan
retrains people
just,
in this
like,
highly
destroyed
competitive,
Carter.
changing society we're in.
He just-
so if a
Carter was a
person loses
robot.
his job, he is retrained.
Reagan
for
just had
benefit,
boomer humor,
for
straight up.
work
Every
that'll,
meme you've seen
be
on
productive,
Facebook
and he won't have to go on one
with
of
the
these
minion,
many programs that the liberals keep
I feel
talking
like half
about.
of them just came
I
from
see
Reagan.
a young man who is a knowledgeable
Like that type of humor.
in defense, and there are 3 people on our ticket.
He just Reagan
that are
always just seemed
knowledgeable in the
comfortable
whole
and just like.
race, knowledgeable in defense, and Dan Quayle is one of them. And
But I'll say,
am one of them. And I believe
Dukakis,
that
I
he
think,
will be
did
outstanding,
very
and
good
he
in this
took a
debate, though.
tremendous pounding, and everybody
But this
now
ending
knows
here,
that he took a
I
very
feel like gave a little bit more to
unfair
Bush than
pounding.
he didn't
and
need.
I'd like each person to say, did I jump to conclusions, running down rumors that were so outrageous and so brutal? And he's kept his head up, and he will do very, very well. And he has my full confidence, and he'll have the confidence of people that are in their 30s and 40s and more. So judge the man on his record, not on a lot of rumors and innuendo and trying to fool around with his name. My opponent says J. Danforth Quayle. Do you know who J. Danforth was? He was a man that gave his life in World War II. So ridiculing a person's name is a little beneath this process. And he'll do very well.
Because he said a lot of good stuff, Dukakis. Like, he's been pretty critical.
Well, when it comes to ridicule, George, you win a gold medal. I think we can agree on that. Over the course of this campaign.
Facts.
But did I sense a desire that maybe Lloyd Benson ought to be your running mate when you said that 3 people on your ticket?
No, I think the debate ought to be between you and Lloyd.
I think the American people have a right to judge us on this question. On
But yeah,
how
it's
we
usually
pick
just
our running mate.
like, yeah, Reagan admitted to like, yeah, we need to like
I picked Lloyd Benson.
lower taxes on corporations. I'm going to be tough on crime. We need more like weapons to defend our nation. Like Reagan was pretty honest of like the things he wanted to do in this debate, but he was just very charismatic.
Qualified person for that job, and as a matter of fact,
clearly it worked.
I think for most people, the notion of President Quayle is a very, very troubling notion tonight.
All right, John will now ask a question of the governor. It will be the last question, and then the vice president will have.
And I really feel like
John?
Well, Governor, you did select Lloyd Benson of Texas.
I did indeed.
And you have a lot of
I
disagreement
do
with him
feel
on
like Bush
fundamental
though is
issues,
still like
including
riding the
Reagan
coattails
tax
of Reagan
cuts,
though.
aid to the rebels in
I
Nicaragua,
mean, it'll show in the
death
Electoral
penalty,
College, but I
gun
can't wait to watch
control.
the
Who's right?
Perot, Bush, and Clinton debate.
Well, John, I'm a man that's been a chief executive for 10 years. I've picked a lot of people. I've picked cabinets. I've named judges. I know that the people you pick make an enormous difference in your ability to govern. And I set high standards. I try to meet them, and I insist that people who work for me meet them. And if they don't stick around very long. But I didn't pick Lloyd Bentsen because he was a clone of Mike Dukakis. I picked him because he was somebody who would be a strong vice president, somebody who would be an active vice president, somebody who would come to me if somebody came up with a crazy idea that we ought to trade arms to the Ayatollah for hostages and say, Mr. President, that's wrong. We shouldn't do that. That's the kind of
keeps
vice
going to
president I
that.
want. He himself has
But I don't think
said
Americans
so.
give a shit.
He'll be a strong vice president.
They're like,
The
yeah,
president
give
makes a decision.
the terrorists
That will be
guns.
his decision. But I'm very, very proud of that choice, and I didn't pick him because he agreed with me on everything. You know, Sam Rayburn once said that if two people agree on everything, then only one person is doing the thinking. The fact is that I've picked somebody who not only will be a great vice president, but if, God forbid, something happens to the president, could step into that office and do so with distinction and with strength and with leadership. I doubt very much that Mr. Bush's selection for the vice presidency of the United States meets that test.
Mr. Vice President?
Well, we obviously have a difference. I believe it does meet the test. We'll have
we
an
still have 10
opportunity
minutes
to
on
see
this
the
one?
two of them in action in a friendly forum, wonderful, friendly fashion like this. I'd hoped that this had been a little friendlier an evening. I'd wanted to hitchhike a ride home in his tank with him, but I think now we got the lines too carefully drawn here. But you talk about
I think there's legitimately beef between them.
What kind
Like,
of judgment?
more than what we've
jumping all over the
seen
president on his
previously.
decision on
Like, just the
one
way they've been
era of foreign
acting.
policy? What kind of judgment has your chief education
want them to
advisor
fight.
now in jail in Massachusetts? I mean,
I think Bush should
don't
win, though,
think
'cause
this
Bush
is a
was, like,
fair argument.
standing over him.
Nevertheless, I support my
Bush was a
nominee
giant
for
compared to Dukakis
vice president, and he'll do an outstanding
when they
job.
both came out on stage.
Gentlemen, I was given some bad word a moment ago. There is time for one more question. Getting it in my ear, and Ann Grower will ask it. Ann?
They have backup questions?
The Vice President
To
first.
the governor, sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Governor Dukakis, as many U.S. farmers face or undergo
Bonus round.
foreclosure, the United States is considering the possibility of forgiving a certain percentage of debt owed by Latin American and third world countries.
Oh, I
Do you
thought-
favor giving these countries a break in their loans? And if so, how do you explain that to the American farmers who are losing
about
their
to say
land and
student debt.
livelihood?
Well, I think we have to go to work on the problem of third world debt, and we've got to assist those third world countries in dealing with this massive debt which they currently, which they have incurred and which is burdening them, and which, if we don't do something about it and assist them along with other nations around the world, will destroy their economies, destroy their future, and at the same time will destroy markets that are important to our farmers. But I also believe that we need an agricultural policy which doesn't cost us the $15 to $20 to $25 billion a year that it's been costing us over the course of the past 3 or 4 years under this administration. I think it's going to require good, solid credit policies, and thanks to the Congress, we now have an agricultural credit bill which is helping and improving the situation with at least some of our farmers. I think it's going to require
Here's the
a
farmer
combination
conversation
of
again.
supply
I'm
management,
telling you, the
reasonable
Democrats are
price
trying to
supports
flip a
make sure
couple
that
of the
our
farmer
farmers get
votes that they don't
a
normally
decent
get,
price.
I feel like.
And I think it also is going to require an administration that understands that there are tremendous opportunities out there for the development of new uses for agricultural products, new uses which can help us to clean up our environment at the same time. Biodegradable plastic, gasohol, which the
Biodegradable
Vice President himself has been
plastic?
involved
Excuse
in,
me?
road de-ices made from corn products. I mean,
Is
there
that-
are enormous
is that kinda like
opportunities
clean
out there
coal?
to expand markets and to
Does that work the same
build a
way?
strong future for our farmers. But I don't think there's anything mutually exclusive or contradictory about building a strong farm economy in this country and assisting our family farms and providing a good, strong future for rural communities and for rural America, and at the same time working on third world debt. As a matter of fact, Mexico itself is one of our biggest agricultural customers, so in the sense that we can work to help Mexico rebuild and expand and deal with its very serious economic problems, we help our
The
farmers
fly
at
is
the
there
same time.
again.
Mr. Vice President.
I oppose
fly
supply
landed on him.
management and production controls.
The fly
I
landed on,
support the Farm Bill, the 85
think it was
Farm
Gore.
Bill, and its spending is moving in the right direction.
Because we know the fly lands on
expand
Hillary.
our
We know the
markets
fly
abroad.
lands
That's why
on
I called for that first economic
Pence.
summit to be on agriculture.
I think there
will
is
not go
a
back
fly
to, the way the
to
Democrats
you
did
losing
it
the
and use
election
food as a political weapon
thing
and throw
going
a grain
on.
embargo on the farmers in this country. I want to see rural redevelopment, and I have been
remember,
out
I
front
think it
in
was-
favor
I think it was
of
Ford.
alternate sources of energy, and one of them is gasohol.
Or was it Carter?
Comes from using your corn, and I think we can do better in terms of biodegradables for a lot of products. So I'm optimistic about the agricultural economy.
Flies like that stinky
in terms
stink,
of the third
yeah.
world, I support the Baker Plan. I want to see market economies spring up all around the world, and to the degree they do, we are succeeding. And I don't want to see the banks let off the hook. I would oppose that, but I think we're on the right track in agriculture, and I am very, very encouraged. But let's not
Rain makes corn.
go back to that,
Corn makes
what they call
whiskey
supply
or whatever.
management and production control. That'll simply price us out of the international market. Let's try to expand our markets abroad.
All right, that really is the end. Now let's
Send
go
corn to the
closing
French.
statements. They will be
That's
2
my policy.
minutes each in duration by agreement. Vice President Bush goes first. Governor Dukakis
Final
second. Mr.
statements.
Vice
All
President.
right.
I talked in New Orleans about a gentler and kinder nation, and I've made specific proposals on education and the environment, on ethics, on energy, and on how we do better in battling crime in our country. But there are two main focal points of this election: opportunity and peace. I want to keep this expansion going. Yes, we want change, but we are the change. I am the change. I don't want to go back to malaise and misery index. And so, opportunity, keep America at work. The
Keep
best
America
poverty
great
program
again.
is
Oh,
a
wait.
job with dignity in the private sector. And in terms of peace, we are on the right track. We've achieved an arms control agreement that our critics thought was never possible, and I want to build on it. I want to see us finalize that START agreement, and I want to be the one to finally lead the world to banishing chemical and biological weapons. I want to see asymmetrical reductions in conventional forces. And then it gets down to a question of values. We've had a chance to spell out our differences on the Pledge of Allegiance here tonight and on tough sentencing of drug
I really did like
kingpins and this kind of
Dukakis'
thing. I do
response
favor the
saying
death
that
penalty.
Bush
We've got a
never
wide
voted
array of
to
differences on those.
do Pledge of
And in the
Allegiance
final
in
analysis-
Congress.
In the final analysis,
To do it before every
person goes
Congress
into that
session.
voting booth, they're going to say, who has the values?
I can't believe that was a
I
culture
believe
war
in?
thing
Who has
in the 80s. Was like
experience
saying to do the Pledge of Allegiance
that we
in school.
trust? Who has the integrity and the stability to get the job done? My fellow Americans, I am that man, and I ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Short and sweet. Nice. Thank you.
Governor Dukakis.
This has been an extraordinary 18 months for Kitty and me and for our family.
My fellow
We've had
Americans,
an
I
opportunity
am
to
that
campaign
man,
all over
and
this
I ask for
country,
your
to meet
support.
with so many of you communities, states, and regions.
I'm that guy.
To get to know you. I'm more optimistic today than I was when I began about this nation, providing we have the kind of leadership in Washington that can work with you, that can build partnerships. that
Vote
can
for
build
me.
jobs
The other
in
guy
every part of this
sucks.
country, not certain parts of this country. You know, my friends, my parents came to this country as immigrants, like millions and millions of Americans before them and since, seeking opportunity, seeking the American dream. And they made sure their sons understood that this was the greatest country in the world, that those of us especially who were the sons and daughters of immigrants had a special responsibility to give something back to the country that had opened up its arms to our parents and given so much to them. I believe in the American dream. I'm a product of it. And I want to help that dream come true for every single citizen in this land, with a good job at good wages, with good schools in
Hit
every
like
part
if
of this
you
country
think
and
the
every
American
community in
dream
this
is a thing.
with decent and affordable housing that our people can buy and own and live in, so that we end the shame of homelessness in America, with decent and affordable health care for all working families. Yes, it's a tough problem, as Mr. Bush says, but it's not an insolvable problem. It's one that we will solve and must solve, with a clean and wholesome environment, and with a strong America that's strong militarily and economically, as we must be. An America that provides strong international leadership because we're true to our values. We have an opportunity working together to build that future, to build a better America, to build a best America. Because the best America doesn't hide, we compete. The best America doesn't waste, we invest. The best America doesn't leave some of its citizens behind. We bring everybody along.
Yeah.
And the best America is not behind us. The best America is yet to come. Thank you very much for listening.
I mean, he had a big crowd cheer too. I want to know how they find each. I wonder if they get 50-50 of like for the crowd. You know what I mean? I'm a product of the American dream is a sad thing to say. Yeah, I know. Ethan, every time you write in a quote and then have it start with like folks and I see America, my brain immediately goes to Trump. Folks, America needs help moving on from the previous administration. And when someone needs help, they should be able to count on their neighbors. So who do you want to help you move? Because I got a truck. God damn it. All right, well, that was the first one. I think this one might be, at least the first half, I feel like the first 30 minutes might be my favorite 30 minutes that we've watched in this series so far. There was some exchange, some beef, it feels like, between Bush and Dukakis. There was some definitely hot takes. Literally the first question was, hey, Bush, what do you think about the drug use in this country? And he was, saying how we don't have any values anymore, and we need to. He talked about Crocodile Dundee and how that movie had a big cocaine scene, and that we shouldn't have that. And he talked about not decriminalizing marijuana. So that just, I don't know, just some crazy answers, and yeah. But the second half, I feel like once you get to international issues, it's always like they're kind of all the same. They're all just like, they're kind of all the same of just like, we need to build our budget or build our military budget. We need to expand this. We don't deal with terrorists. That's kind of how it's been. So I don't expect that to change too much. Once we get into like Bush versus like, what's his name there? Kerry. Like, I feel like we're going to get the post 9/11 stuff, which I think will be interesting to watch. Especially since I grew up then, and that was like the first election I kind of remember. I didn't like watch the debates because I was like 10 years old, but I didn't watch the debate between Clint Eastwood and that chair. Is that a reference I'm supposed to know? Did Clint Eastwood do something? All right, let's move to the second one. Let's keep it moving. This one's in Los Angeles, California, October 13th. So, was it about a month later? And a month till election night. Let's see what happens.
Good evening.
RNC 2012. Did he do that?
Commission on Presidential Debates, I am pleased to welcome you to the second presidential debate. I am Bernard Shaw of CNN, Cable News Network. My colleagues on the panel are Ann Compton of ABC News, Margaret Warner of Newsweek magazine, and Andrea Mitchell of NBC News. The
Everyone is very 80s.
Vice President George Bush, the Republican nominee.
Look how much taller Bush is. Look at him.
And Governor Michael Dukakis.
That's a power move. Power move, man. Did they switch sides? Oh, no, never mind. Got a new setup here in a little bit. Got the red, white, and blue.
Agreed to by representatives of the two campaigns. However, there are no restrictions on the questions that my colleagues and I can ask this evening, and the candidates have no prior knowledge of our questions. By agreement between the candidates,
I still don't know if I believe that either.
Governor Dukakis, you have 2 minutes to respond. Governor, if
I'll never forget though when Clinton got
the
debate question so early,
would
supposedly.
you favor
in the primaries.
An irrevocable death penalty for the killer.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
About who?
I don't see any evidence that it's determined.
The candidates following a format designed
Sorry, I missed that.
and
I'm paying
agreed
attention.
to by representatives of the two campaigns. However, there are no restrictions on the questions that my colleagues and I can ask this evening, and the candidates have no prior knowledge of our questions. By agreement between the candidates, the first question goes to Governor Dukakis. You have 2 minutes to respond. Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
What kind of question is that? That is an awful question. Jesus Christ. Like, who asked that? Like, I get, like, he started off by saying, no questions are off the table, but, like, what is this hypothetical? Like, why would you want someone to think about that? About their daughter? What a fucked up question.
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during.
And he has to, like, answer this, like.
I don't see any evidence that it's a deterrent, and I think there are better and more effective ways to deal with violent crime. We've done so in my own state, and it's one of the reasons why we have had the biggest drop in crime of any industrial state in America, why we have the lowest.
Like, I don't give a shit about this guy, but, like.
But we have work to do.
Why? Like, that's such a.
We have work to do to fight a real war, not a phony war against drugs, and that's something that I want to lead, something we haven't had over the course of the past many years, even though the Vice President has been, at least allegedly, in charge of that war. We have much to do to step up that war, to double the number of drug enforcement agents, to fight both here and abroad, to work with our neighbors in this hemisphere, and I want to call a hemispheric summit just as soon after the 20th of January as possible to fight that war. But we also have to deal with drug education prevention here at home. And that's one of the things that I hope I can lead personally as the President of the United States. We've had great success in my own state, and we've reached out to young people and their families and been able to help them by beginning drug education and prevention in the early elementary grades. So we can fight this war and we can win this war. And we can do so in a way that marshals our forces, that provides real support for state and local law enforcement officers who have not been getting that kind of support.
Do y'all hear that beeping?
Do it in a way which will bring down violence in this nation.
Well, like, it's not happening now, but like every once in a while.
Will stop this avalanche of drugs that's pouring into.
Like, it sounds like a mic opening, like a
will
right
make
here.
It possible for our kids and our families to grow up in safe and secure and decent neighborhoods.
I don't think that's
Mr.
me.
Vice President, your 1 minute rebuttal.
Well, a lot of what this campaign is about, it seems to me, Bernie, gets to a question of values. And here I do have on this particular question a big difference with my opponent. You see, I do believe that some crimes are so heinous, so brutal, so outrageous, and I'd say particularly those that result in the death of a police officer. Those real brutal crimes, I do believe in the death penalty. And I think it is a deterrent. And I believe we need it. And I'm glad that the Congress moved on this drug bill and have finally called for that related to these narcotics drug kingpins. And so we just have an honest difference of opinion. I support it, and he doesn't.
Now to you, Vice President Bush. I quote to you this from Article 3 of the 20th Amendment of the Constitution. Quote, if at the time fixed for the beginning of the term of the President-elect shall have died.
Yeah, cops are very vulnerable.
The Vice President-elect shall become President. Meaning,
there it is. It's getting louder.
And die before Inauguration Day.
Ernie.
Yeah, like but for real, like I'm actually with Bush on this one. Just this one thing, okay? Just make that clear. Like the questions this guy is asking is like just kind of fucked up questions. That's the second one in a row of like, hey, this like hypothetical where you're dead. Yeah, what if you died? I'd be dead. What? Like, why? Like, why is that a question?
Automatically, Dan Quayle would become the 41st President of the United States. What have you to say about that possibility?
I'd have confidence in him.
Like, that's why I chose him. Yeah. Yeah, let's see if they ask Biden that. No, but I don't think that's an appropriate question to ask any of them. Like, clearly that's why they have a vice president. But there's vice president debates as well. Like, it's not...
And I made a good selection. And I've never seen such a pounding, an unfair pounding on a young senator in my entire
Mondale
life.
Had a female
And I've never seen a presidential
VP, or woman
campaign
VP.
where the presidential nominee
Why is it
runs
getting
against
louder?
my vice presidential nominee. Never seen one before. But, you know, Lloyd Benson jumped on Dan
I feel like it got
Quayle.
louder.
When Dan Quayle said he
Now
had
it's too
roughly the
quiet?
same amount of experience. He had 2 terms in the Congress. He had 2 terms in the Senate, serving his
Yeah,
second
what long
term.
form answer do they want besides spending
Founded
2 minutes
the-
of saying, I trust my
authored
guy?
the Job
Right.
Training Partnership Act that says to American working men and women that are thrown out of work for no fault of their own, that they're going to have jobs. We're moving into a new competitive age, and we need that kind of thing. He, unlike my opponent, is an expert in national defense, helped amend the INF Treaty, so we got a good, sound treaty. When these people over here were talking about a freeze, if we'd listened to them, we would never have had a treaty. And so I have great confidence
Someone's
in him.
mic is like
And,
being
he's
muted or something.
It's turning around. You know,
There's some
the American
feedback.
people are fair.
It's bothering me.
They don't like it when there's an unfair pounding and kind of hooting about people. They want to judge it on the record itself. And so I'm proud of my choice. And, you know, I don't think age is the only criterion, but I'll tell you something. I'm proud that people that are 30 years old and 40 years old now have someone in their generation that is going to be Vice President of the United States of America. I made a good selection. The American people are seeing it, and I am proud of it. That's what I'd say, and he could do
The
the
people
job.
are loving it.
Governor Dukakis,
They
your
love to see it.
1-minute rebuttal.
Bernard, this was the first presidential decision that we as nominees were called upon to make. And that's why people are so concerned, because it was an opportunity for us to demonstrate what we were looking for in a running mate. More than that, it was the first national security decision that we had to make. The Vice President talks about national security 3 times since World War II. The Vice President has
You know what? I changed my...
become the President Commander-in-Chief.
When was the first VP debate? I think it
picked
was
Lloyd
the
Benson.
same... I think it was 1960. I think there was a VP debate then. I changed my mind, by the way, about asking them, like, what if you died? I think it should only apply to, like, if DeSantis in his, like, let's say DeSantis wins the Republican primary, and the joke is that Elon Musk is the VP, I want him to, for 2 minutes straight, talk about how great Elon Musk is with a straight face. That's the only thing I could think of that'd be funny.
The best
With that
qualified
question.
person for the job. Mr. Bush.
I think the people love him.
Mr. Bush picked Dan Quayle, and before he did it, he said,
And look what he did at Twitter. Everyone
"Watch
loves
my
him.
choice for Vice President. It will tell all." And it sure did. It sure did.
Ann Compton for the Vice President.
Thank you, Bernie. Mr. Vice President, yes, we read your lips. No new taxes.
Good.
But despite that same pledge from President Reagan, after income tax rates were cut, in each of the last 5 years, some federal taxes have gone up on Social Security, cigarettes, liquor, even long-distance telephone
Shit,
calls.
not liquor.
Now, that's money
Fuck.
straight out of people's wallets. Isn't the phrase "no new taxes" misleading the voters?
No, because that I'm pledged to that. And yes, some taxes have gone up. And the main
Elon Musk
point
as
is,
POTUS would
taxes
single-handedly
have been
end
cut,
U.S. hegemony
and
within
yet
3 weeks.
Income is up to the federal government by
Maybe that's what we deserve.
25% in the last 3 years.
Maybe one way
And
we
so
could take
what
down
I
the
wanna
U.S.
do
empire is
keep
we
this
do elect Elon
expansion
Musk.
going. I don't want to
So
kill
I'm
it
afraid
off
of the consequences.
by a tax increase. More Americans at work today than at any time in the history of this country, and a greater percentage of the workforce. And the way you kill expansions
I don't think he
is
can
to
even be
raise taxes.
vice president,
And
though.
I don't want to do that. And I won't do that.
he wasn't born in America,
and what I
right?
have proposed is something much better. And it's going to take discipline of the executive branch. It's going to take discipline of the congressional branch, and that is what I call a flexible freeze that allows growth to about 4% or the rate
I kind of hope
inflation,
Jeb Bush runs, but I feel like he would have announced by now.
Just to add on spending. I hear this talk about a blank check. The American people
Neither
are pretty
was
smart. They know who writes out the checks, and they know who appropriates the money. It is the United States Congress, and by 2 to 1, Congress is blamed for these deficits. And the answer is to discipline both the executive branch and the congressional branch by holding the line on taxes. So I am pledged to do that. And those pessimists who say it can't be done, I'm sorry, I just have a fundamental disagreement with them.
Governor Dukakis, your 1-minute response.
And the Vice President made that pledge. He's broken it 3 times in the past year already. So it isn't worth the paper it's printed on. And what I'm concerned about is that if we continue with the policies that Mr. Bush is talking about here this evening, a flexible freeze, somebody described it the other day as a kind of economic Slurpee.
Imagine if Elon was DeSantis VP pick. Trump would have so much to say. I know, I mean, like, I already feel like the primaries are going to be chaotic, especially with the Trump indictment. I really, like, I am questioning if, like, what's going to happen with the Republican Party. Like, 3 months ago, I'd be like, yeah, Trump has it easily. Easily, but now I'm not sure.
Worth of new debt that's already been added on the backs of the American taxpayers.
But I guess Trump lives off of the doubters, right?
If we continue with this for another 4 years, then
the doubt. That's how he thrives.
I'm worried about the next generation, whether we can ever turn this situation around. No, we need a chief executive who's prepared to lead, who won't blame the Congress, but will lead, will bring down that deficit.
But he can still run even if he's in jail.
We'll go out and do the job.
Because there was one
and do it with the Congress of the United States.
There was one guy who ran for president while he was in jail. I forget his name.
And to Governor Dukakis.
Governor, let me follow up on that by asking
to all the
you
haters, happy 9/11. That's a classic Trump line.
Budgets in a row in Massachusetts. Are you promising the American people here tonight that within a 4-year presidential term you will balance the federal budget?
No, I'm not sure I can promise
that.
I'm
so done with the budget, dude. Really. I don't care.
No way of anticipating what may happen. I will say this.
Telling you, if you took a shot for every time someone asked about the budget,
a steady,
you'd be drunk.
Gradual reduction of the deficit.
Easily.
Which will require tough choices on spending. It will require a good,
every
strong
debate,
rate of economic
there's at least
growth.
one.
It will require a plan that the president works out with the Congress, doesn't blame them, works it out with them, which brings that deficit down. It will require us to go out and collect billions and billions of dollars in taxes.
Billions and billions of dollars.
That's grossly unfair to the average American who's paying his taxes and paying them on time and doesn't have any alternative. It's taken out of his paycheck. Mr. Bush says we're going to put the IRS on every taxpayer. That's not what we're going to do. I'm for the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. But I think it's unconscionable, Ann, that we should be talking or thinking about imposing new taxes on average Americans when there are billions out there, over $100 billion in taxes owed, that aren't being paid. Now, I think if we work together...
We have $3 billion already.
And if you have a president that will work with the Congress and the American people...
Only 12 minutes in.
We can bring that deficit down steadily, $20, $25, $30 billion a year.
Billions.
Build economic growth. Build a good, strong future for America. Invest in those things which we must invest in. Economic development, good jobs, good schools for our kids, college opportunity for young people, decent health care and affordable housing, and a clean and safe environment. We can do all of those things. And at the same time, build a future
biodegradable plastics,
in which we're standing on a good, strong fiscal foundation. Senator Benson said, as you recall, at the debate with Senator Quayle, that if you give any of us $200 billion worth of hot checks a year, we can create an illusion of prosperity, but sooner or later that credit card mentality isn't going to work, and I want to bring to the White House a sense of strength and fiscal responsibility which will build a good, strong foundation under which this country, or above which this country, can move, grow, invest, and build.
Do presidents have credit cards?
For our kids and our grandkids.
Do they need them?
Mr. Vice President,
the governor has to.
Is that a security risk?
The budget in his state. He's required to by law. He's raised taxes several times. I wish he would join me, as a matter of fact.
Did he get a special system?
People for the balanced budget amendment for the federal government and for the line item veto. I'd like to have that line item veto for the president because I think that would be extraordinarily helpful. And I won't do one other thing that he's had to do. Took $29 million out of his state pension fund. That's equivalent on the federal level of taking out of the Social Security Trust Fund. I'm not going to do that. I won't do that, Mr. Member. And so I'm still a little unclear as to whether he's for or against a tax increase. I have been all for the taxpayers' Bill of Rights all along. And this idea of unleashing a whole bunch of army, a conventional force army of IRS agents into everybody's kitchen. I mean, he's against most defense matters, and now he wants to get an army of IRS auditors going out there. I'm against that. I oppose that.
Are people hissing? I think I heard hissing last debate, too.
I'm going to say it once to every person in this auditorium. What these candidates are about is of utmost seriousness to the American voters. They should be heard, and you should be quiet. If you are not quiet, I'm going to implore the candidates to do something about crowding or quieting their own partisans. But we cannot get through this program with these outbursts.
What a polite way to say shut the fuck
Margaret
up.
Warner for Governor Dukakis.
Good evening, Governor. Mr. Vice President. Governor, you won the first debate on intellect, and yet you lost it on heart.
Just a minute.
I don't know if
You'll get your turn. The American public...
Stop.
President agrees with
They
that.
keep humanizing Bush.
The
I hate
American
it.
public admired your performance, but didn't seem to like you much. Now,
He's honestly
Ronald
on Hinge
Reagan
how you can just crack a joke and
has
everyone's like,
found
yeah, he's
his
our guy.
personal
I know.
wealth to be a tremendous political asset. Do you think that a president,
I hate it.
has to be likable to be an effective leader?
Margaret, may I go back and just say to the Vice President that I didn't raid the pension fund in Massachusetts. You're dead wrong, George. We didn't do that. As a matter of fact, I'm the first governor in the history of my state to fund that pension system, and I'm very proud of that. And you just have your interest. No, we did not. No, we did not. I've been in politics for 25 years, Margaret. I've won a lot of elections. I've lost a few, as you know, and learned from those losses.
Took some L's. You got to learn to take an L before you can take a W.
Contests,
That mic thing's back.
I'm a likable guy. I'm serious. Though I think I'm a little more lovable these days than I used to be back in my youth when I began in my state legislature. But I'm also a serious guy. I think the presidency of the United States is a very serious office. And I think we have to address these issues in a very serious way. So I hope and expect that I'll be liked by the people.
You just need to do some videos of you getting ice cream in your convertible, and you'll get some votes.
But I also think it's important to be somebody who's willing to make those tough choices. Now, we've just heard 2 or 3 times from the Vice President that he's not going to raise taxes. I repeat, within days after you made that pledge, you broke it. You said, well, maybe as a last resort, we'll do it. And you've supported legislation this year that's involved tax increases not once but twice. So that pledge isn't realistic, and I think the Vice President knows it. I think the people of this country know it. The fact of the matter is that the next President of the United States is going to have to
Fact of the matter is, that's a classic
seriously. He's going to have to work with the Congress seriously. He can't turn to the Congress and blame them for the fact that we don't have a balanced budget and that we have billions and billions of dollars in red ink. And I'm going to be a president who is serious. I hope and expect will be liked by the American people, but more than that.
Well, no one liked you,
the
unfortunately.
The kind of job that I'm elected to do. We'll do it with as much good humor as I can, but at the same time, we'll do it in a way
we'll do some LOLs along the way.
We want for ourselves and our people, and I think we know what they are.
Governor,
a good, strong
some
future.
gaffes, maybe.
A future in which there is opportunity for all of our citizens.
1 minute from the Vice President.
I don't think it's a question of whether people like you or not to make you an effective leader. I think it's whether you share the broad dreams of the American people, whether you have confidence in the people's ability to get things done, or whether you think it all should be turned over, as many of the liberals do, to Washington, D.C. You see, I think
he's using liberals
values,
today,
like
likability
or lovability.
Like how a lot of people would say socialists and whatever, for like
leaders,
for actual liberals.
Build on a superb record of this administration
the liberals.
in arms control.
Well, I guess right-wingers do say liberals too.
You have to learn from experience that making unilateral cuts in the defense system is not the way that you enhance the peace. You've got to understand that it is only the United States that can stand for freedom and democracy around the world, and we can't turn it over to the United Nations or other multilateral organizations. It is, though, trying to understand the heartbeat of the country. And I know these campaigns get knocked a lot, but I think I'd be a better president now for having had to travel to these communities and understand the family values and the importance of neighborhood.
Margaret Warner for the
They always
Vice
say
President.
that, and like
I'd like to follow up on that, Mr.
at
Vice
most you
President.
have like what
The
Donald Trump
tenor
is
of the
doing,
campaign
visiting a
you've been
Waffle
running
House.
in terms of both the issues and your rhetoric has surprised even
Like
some
a
of
president
your
isn't
friends.
knocking on doors
Senator
or
Mark
anything like that,
Hatfield,
talking to
who's known your family
people.
a long time and who knew your father, the late Senator Prescott Bush, said, and I quote, "If his father were alive today, I'm sure his father would see it as a shocking transformation." Is Senator Hatfield right?
What was he referring to?
He was referring to your performance in the campaign.
Well, I think my dad would be pretty proud of me because I think we've come a long, long way. And I think, 3 months ago,
Do you think your
I
dad
remember
would
some
be
of the
proud
great
of you?
publications in this country had written me off. And what I've had to do is to define not just my position.
I think he
define
misspoke.
his. And I hope I've done it fairly. And the reason I've had to do that is that he ran on the left in the Democratic primary, ran firmly and ran with conviction and ran on his record. And then at that Democratic convention, they made a determination. And they said there, ideology doesn't matter, just competence. And in the process, the negatives began. It wasn't me that was there at that convention. Thank God I was up with Jimmy Baker camping out, and I didn't
Liberals
have to
and
hear
woke
all
has
the
been
personal
kind of switched.
attacks on me out of that Democratic convention.
I mean, I see right-wingers on
to
Twitter
have to
still
listen
use like
to it.
libs.
And I'm not the one that
but-
compared the President of the United States to rotting from like a dead fish from the head down. I didn't do that. But I have defined the issues, and I am not going to let Governor Dukakis
And then woke
go
is
through
just
this
used for
election
anything you don't like.
without explaining some of these very liberal positions. He's the one that said, I am a liberal, traditional liberal, progressive liberal Democrat. He's the one that brought up to garner primary votes the whole question of the ACLU. And I have enormous difference with the ACLU on their political agenda, not on their defending some minority opinion on the right or the left. I support that. But what I don't like is this left-wing political agenda. And therefore, I have to help define that. And if he's unwilling to do it, if he says ideology doesn't matter, I don't agree with him.
I want to know if a Republican today would
1 minute from Governor
shit on
Dukakis.
ACLU in a
Margaret,
debate.
We've heard it again tonight, and I'm not surprised.
I feel like you would
The
lose.
Labels, I guess the vice president called me a liberal 2 or 3 times.
You would lose some
when I was
voters
coming
doing
from the
that.
left. In
But maybe I'm
1980,
wrong.
President Reagan called you a liberal for voting for federal gun control. And this is something Republicans have used for a long time. They tried it with Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and John Kennedy.
In the first debate, he said that
Labels.
ACLU
It's
has
our
like
vision of America, and we have two
they're trying to push for
fundamentally
like
different visions of America.
he's
Vice President
almost basically
is
called
vice-
them like that they are like
we ought to stick with the status
trying to
quo.
get rid of
Doesn't think we ought to
laws that
move ahead.
prevent
Thinks that
child pornography. I
things
think
are okay as they are.
Yeah,
I
it's an
don't.
ideological thing.
I think this is a great country.
He's saying that they're
because
trying to
we've
push
always wanted to do better, to
us
make our
further
country
left.
better, to make our lives better. We've always been a nation which was ambitious for America, and we move forward. And that's
But
the
that
kind of
he literally
America I
talked
want.
about
That's
like
the kind of leadership
movies
I
and
want to
having
provide. But
X-rated
I
movie
don't
or
think
something
these
like that. I don't
labels
remember what
mean
they.
a thing, and
He was very
I would
vague
hope
about
that
it, but
tonight
it
and
probably
over
was
the
just
rest of this
bullshit.
campaign, we can have our good, solid disagreements on issues. There's nothing the matter with that. But let's stop labeling each other, and let's get to the heart of the matter, which is the future of this country.
But yeah, I don't know if
Andrea Mitchell for the Vice President.
like what the
Mr. Vice
ACLU's
President,
standing is
Governor.
nowadays.
Mr. Vice President, let me return for a moment to the issue of the budget, because so much has already been put off limits in your campaign that most people do not believe that the flexible freeze alone will solve the problem of the deficit. So let's turn to defense for a moment. Pentagon officials tell us that there is not enough money in the budget to handle military readiness, preparedness, as well as new weapons systems that have been proposed, as well as those already in the pipeline. You were asked at the first debate what new weapons systems you would cut. You mentioned 3 that had already been canceled. Can you tonight share with us 3 new weapons systems that you would cut?
If I knew of 3 new weapon systems that I thought were purely waste and weren't protected by the Congress, they wouldn't be in the budget. They would not be in the budget. But you want one now? I'll give you one. That Hemet, that heavy truck that costs, what is it, $850 million, and the Pentagon didn't request
No heavy
it,
trucks.
and yet a member of Congress, a very powerful one, put it in the budget. I think we can save money through this whole very sophisticated concept, Andrea, that I know you do understand.
No
of
Tesla
competitive
trucks.
strategies. It is new, and it is very, very different than what's happened, but it's not quite ready to be totally implemented, but it's very important. I think we can say through the Packard Commission report, and I'm very proud that David Packard, the originator of that report, is strongly supporting me. So it's not a question of saying our budget is full of a lot of waste. I don't believe that. I do think this. We're in the serious stages of negotiation with the Soviet Union now on the strategic arms control talks. And we are protecting a couple of options in terms of modernizing our strategic forces. My Secretary of Defense is going to have to make a very difficult decision in which system to go forward with. But we are protecting both of them. We're moving forward.
They talk like as if the defensive system is like picking an iPhone or an Android. we have to look at all the
one
features.
One or the other of the two options right now.
What is the price tag?
Modernizing. They continue to modernize. And we can't simply say, we've got enough nuclear weapons, let's freeze. We can't do that. We have to have modernization, especially if we achieve the 50% reduction in strategic weapons that our president is taking the leadership.
Gotta compare the market, get the best deal.
So that's the way
also,
I
like,
to it.
Are you on T-Mobile or are you on Sprint?
Have the strongest and
They're
best
on Verizon,
possible.
you know what I mean? Like those, they might have deals.
If we go forward with competitive strategies, and if we do follow through on the Packard Commission report.
Governor Dukakis, 1 minute.
Well, Andrea, we just had another example of why the Vice President's mathematics just doesn't add up. I think you know, because you've covered these issues, that there's no way that we can build.
The other one comes with the free mug.
The Vice President says he wants to build within the existing defense budget. Everybody knows that, including the people at the Pentagon.
Yeah, everyone in the Department of Defense gets a
defense
free mug
secretary
if we
is
go
gonna
this
have a lot
route.
to do with some of those decisions, but it's going to be the president that's going to have to ultimately decide before that budget goes to the Congress what weapon systems are going to go and what are going to stay. We are not going to spend the billions and trillions that Mr. Bush wants to spend on Star Wars. We're not going to spend billions.
I wish
on
they
MXs
allowed
on
them to
railroad
bring
cars,
like
which is a weapon system we don't need, can't afford, and won't
bring
help
like
our defense.
I don't know, just like
We're not
some
gonna
sort
spend
of like
hundreds of millions on the
big
space planes
graphs or something,
in
like
Washington.
some
So,
visual
those are
component.
decisions that the chief executive
Like
has to
let
make.
them do a PowerPoint.
Yes, we're going to have a strong, incredible, and effective.
Give them a couple
nuclear
questions
deterrent.
ahead of
We're gonna
time. I
go
want them to
forward
come
with
in
stealth,
and give me a
D5,
PowerPoint
advanced
that
cruise
they
missiles,
have to make from
and good
scratch.
conventional forces.
They don't get any
The next
help.
president of the United States will have
I want
to
my
make
president to
some
know how
tough
to use
and difficult
PowerPoint.
decisions. I'm prepared to make them.
But like, hey, do a
Vice
PowerPoint
President is
on
not.
fixing the budget.
Andrea has a question for you.
Because you just say all these numbers, like I don't know what any of this means.
Governor,
Or I don't really care
continuing
either.
on that subject, then, you say that we have to do something about conventional forces. You have supported the submarine-launched missile, the D5, you just referred to. Yet, from Jerry Ford to Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan, there has been a bipartisan consensus in favor of modernizing the land-based missiles. Now, you have ruled out the MX and the Midgetmen. More recently, some of your aides have hinted at some flexibility that you might show about some other new form of missile. Can you tell us tonight why you have rejected the collected wisdom of people as diverse as Sam Nunn, Henry Kissinger, Al Gore, people in both parties, and what type of land-based missile?
Fucking Henry Kissinger getting name dropped again.
Well, Andrea, today we have 13,000 strategic nuclear warheads on land, on air, and the sea. That's an incredibly powerful nuclear deterrent. I don't rule out modernization, and there are discussions going on now in the Congress, I know at the Pentagon, about a less expensive, modernized, land-based leg of the triad. But there are limits to what we can spend. There are limits to this nation's ability to finance these weapon systems. And one of the things that the Vice President either ignores or won't address is the fact that you can't divorce our military security from our economic security. How can we build a strong America militarily that's teeter-tottering on a mountain of debt? And if we go forward with the kinds of policies that the Vice President is suggesting tonight and has in the past, that debt's going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. So military security and economic security go hand in hand. And we will have a strong and effective and credible nuclear deterrent. We're going to have
I don't like
conventional forces. That
He's
are well
right, but I don't like how
maintained,
he's using that as an
well-trained,
argument to
well-supported. And we have serious problems with our conventional forces at the present
to
time,
make
and they'll get
to
worse
make more guns.
unless we have a president who is willing to make some of these decisions.
But yeah, like our economy is
We
tied a
also have
lot to
important
us going to
domestic
war.
priorities in education, in housing, in health care.
That's why we love the Ukraine
job
war.
training, in the environment. Now, all
We were
of these
licking
things
our
are gonna have
chops.
to be addressed. And that's why I say again to all of you out there who have to deal with your household budgets and know how difficult it is that the next president has to do the same. I want the men and women of our armed forces to have the support they need to defend us, the support they need when they risk our lives to keep us free and to keep this country free. But we cannot continue to live on a credit card. We cannot continue to tell the American people that we're going to build all of these systems and at the same time...
I mean, do we have a good credit card, though? Do we get like 5% back?
And be serious about building a strong and good America.
5% back on military purchases?
That's the kind of America I want to build.
1 minute for the Vice President.
I think the foremost... Can we start the clock over? I held off for the applause. Can I get...
You can
Stop.
Proceed, sir.
Stop.
I think the foremost responsibility of a president really gets down to the national security of this
Hate it,
country.
Bush. Stop doing
the
that.
The governor talks about limits, what we can't do, poses these two modernization systems, talks now about, well, we'll develop some new kind of a
Sorry, that
missile.
was a motorcycle.
It takes 8 years, 10 years to do that. He talked about a nuclear freeze back at the time when I was in Europe trying to convince European public opinion that we ought to go forward with the deployment of the INF weapons. And thank God the freeze people were not heard. They were wrong. And the result is we deployed and the Soviets kept deploying.
Yeah, I know.
We negotiated from strength.
I don't think anyone at this point
now
knew that the
first
USSR was
arms
being
control
dissolved.
Agreement in the
Or
nuclear
collapsed,
age to
rather.
ban weapons. You just don't
I think that
make
happened very
unilateral
quickly.
cuts in the naive hope that the Soviets are going to behave themselves. World peace is important, and we have enhanced the peace, and I'm proud to have been a part of an administration that has done exactly that. Peace through strength works.
Ann Compton for Governor Dukakis.
Governor, today they may call them role models, but they used to be called heroes, the kind of public figure who could inspire a whole generation, someone who was larger than life. My question is not who your heroes were. My question instead is, who are the heroes who are there in American life today? Who are the ones that you would point out to young Americans as figures who should inspire this country?
Well, I think when I think of heroes, I think back, not...
You ever heard of this man called Donald Trump?
But there are many people who I admire in this country today. Some of them are in public life, in the Senate, the Congress. Some of my fellow governors who are real heroes to me. I think of those young athletes who represented us at the Olympics. Were tremendously
Name one.
Impressive. We were proud of them.
This is a fumble right here.
They did so well by us.
Specifics.
I can think of doctors and scientists, Jonas Salk, who, for
Name
example,
one person.
discovered a vaccine which cured one of the most
Come on.
dread diseases we ever had, and he's a hero. I think of classroom teachers that I have had, classroom teachers that youngsters have today who are real heroes to our
I'll give you that one, but
they inspire them.
I think they're looking for specific
Teach them,
people.
but more than that, they are role models. Members of the clergy who have done the same. Drug counselors out there in the street
maybe not the clergy.
providing help to youngsters who come up to me and others and ask for help and want help and doing the hard work, the heroic work which it takes to provide that kind of leadership, that kind of counseling, that kind of support. I think of people in the law enforcement community who are taking their lives in their hands every day. Go up to one of those doors and kick it down and try to stop this flow of drugs into our communities and into our kids. So there are many, many heroes in this country today.
Dude,
These are
both of
people
them are
that
so heavy
give
on
of
the war on
themselves
drugs.
every day
It's
and every week and every
ridiculous.
month. In many cases, they're people in the community who are examples and are role models. And I would hope that one of the things that I could do as president is to recognize them, to give them the kind of recognition that they need and deserve so that more and more young people can themselves become the heroes of tomorrow, can go into public service, can go into teaching, can go into drug counseling, can go into law enforcement, and be heroes themselves to generations yet to come.
1 minute for
Awful.
Vice President Bush.
I think of a teacher right here, largely Hispanic school, Jaime Escalante.
There you go.
Teaching
Name a
calculus
person,
to young
even if you
kids,
make it up.
80% of them going on to college. I think of a young man and now in this country named Villadares, who was released from a Cuban jail, came out and told the troop in this.
He gets
brilliant
points for
book
this because he
Against
actually
All
names
Hope
people.
about what is actually happening in
Granted,
Cuba.
he gets 2
I think of
minutes to
those
think
people
about
who
it,
took
but
us back into space again. Rick Houck and that crew is people.
Seems
that
like
are
he actually
worthy of
pays
this.
attention,
I agree
you
with
know
the
what I mean?
governor on athletics, and there's nothing corny about having sports heroes young people that are clean and honorable and
like who?
Setting a
Joe Montana?
Setting the pace. I think of Dr. Fauci. Probably never heard of him. Well, you did. Ann heard him. He's a very fine research.
Dr. Fauci. No way. Are you kidding me? Dude, someone needs to bring this back. Someone needs to point to this clip. Especially if Trump runs again or wins the primary. You need to be like, well, the Republicans used to love Fauci. What happened?
Top doctor.
What the pandemic did to us.
At National Institute of Health, working hard, doing something about research on this disease of AIDS. But look,
crazy.
I also think we ought to give a little credit to the president.
He name dropped Dr. Fauci. That's crazy.
He is the one that
I didn't even know Fauci was around then. I know he retired, but like, I didn't know he was around then. It's crazy how all these people are like, were around in the 80s. Henry Kissinger was name dropped during during Carter versus Ford there. Henry Kissinger. God damn it.
That first arms control agreement, and the cynics abounded. And he is leaving office
Kissinger,
with popularity at an all-time high because the American people say he is our
But
hero.
Bush was running president back in the 70s as well. So was Reagan.
Question for you, Mr. Vice President.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
change the pace a little bit, Mr. Vice President. In
these people have all just been doing this for decades.
Things have been spoken by each side.
And that's why we don't even have. I don't like progressive politics. It's like, I don't know if that's true because like all these people just kind of loosely change over time, but they're at the core they're just the same freaking candidates every time.
About each side. If you'd consider for a moment Governor Dukakis and his years of public service. Is there anything nice you can say about him? Yeah. Anything you find admirable?
Hey, listen, you're stealing my clothes.
Head of FBI for 50 years? Jesus.
Somebody leaked my question to you?
I'll tell you what. No, let me tell you something about that. And Barb and I were sitting there before that Democratic convention, and we saw the governor and his son on television the night before, and his family, and his mother who was there. And I'm saying to Barbara, you know, we've always kept family as a bit of an oasis for us. You all know me, and we've held it back a little, but we use that as a role model. The way he took understandable pride in his heritage, what his family means to him.
Family.
And we've got a strong family, and we watched that, and we said, hey, we got to unleash the Bush kids. And so you saw 10 grandchildren there jumping all over their grandfather at the
No,
at
do
the
not release the Bush kids.
You see our 5 kids all over this country and their spouses. And so I would say that the concept of Dukakis' family has my great respect. And I'd say that, I don't know if that's kind or not, it's just an objective statement. And I think anybody that gets into this political arena and has to face you guys every day deserves a word of praise, because it's gotten a little ugly out there. It's gotten a little nasty.
It's not nasty
enough.
enough.
Fun sometimes.
It's not nasty enough.
I would cite again Dan Quayle. I've been in politics a long time.
I mean, like, we had the weird 2 questions from the first guy there at the start. But, like, the last debate there with Reagan and Mondale there, like, I really loved the panels. They were, like, doing a lot of gotchas against both candidates. That's how the media really should be.
And I don't remember that kind of piling on, that kind of
if you believe in the whole American
system,
system, like I said, in that context.
Now, come on.
Of like freedom of speech. The reason freedom of speech exists is more for the media.
Teddy Roosevelt used to
criticize
talk about the arena, you know, daring to fail greatly or
to criticize the.
He's in there. So I salute these things. I salute those who participate in the political process. Sam Rayburn had a great expression on this. He said, you know, here all these intellectuals.
I'd rather have more gotchas than them talking for the 50th time on what they would do with the budget.
Rayburn says,
yeah, panels of 84 were good.
Sheriff either. Michael Dukakis has run for sheriff, and so has George Bush.
Governor, a 1-minute response, sir.
I didn't hear the word liberal or left one time. I thank you for that.
That's not bad. That's true. Go ahead.
And doesn't that prove the point, George, which is that values like family and education, community,
Are you going to do a debate tier list once you go through them all?
Decent homes.
If anything, I should be doing it now because I'm probably going to forget.
Visited on Monday where
But maybe we'll do that
bought a house for
at some point.
$19,000 back in 1962.
I've been keeping a loose list in my head.
They can't live in the community in which they grew up in. Those are basic American values. I believe in them. I think you believe in them. They're not left or right. They're decent American values. I guess the one thing that
these are definitely the best ones we've had, though, so far. Just because they're spicy.
Label things which all of us believe in.
This is why we actually watch debates. It's entertainment.
You deal with them in different ways, but they're basically American. I believe in them. George Bush believes in them. I think the vast majority.
At least nowadays, it feels like I said, just energize the base.
The tone we've just heard.
It's an entertainment thing.
Just be the tone we have for the rest of the campaign. I think the American people would appreciate that.
What is this centrist for all Americans
Margaret
garbage?
Warner for the Vice President.
Vice President Bush, abortion remains with us as a very troubling issue, and I'd like to explore that for a minute with you. You have said that you regard abortion as murder, yet you would make exceptions in the case
I don't want to do this
of
question
rape
again.
and incest. My question
It's gross.
is, why should a woman who discovers through amniocentesis that her baby will be born with Tay-Sachs disease, for instance, that the baby will live at most 2 years, and those 2 years in incredible pain, be forced to carry the fetus to term, and yet a woman who becomes pregnant through incest would be allowed to abort her fetus?
Because you left out one other exception, the health of the mother. Let me answer your question, and I hope it doesn't get too personal or maudlin. Bar and I lost a child. You know that. We lost a daughter, Robin. And we were out, I was over running records in West Texas, and I got a call from her, come home. Went to the doctor. The doctor said, beautiful child. Your child has a few weeks to live. And I said, what can we do about it? He said, no, she has leukemia, acute leukemia, a few weeks to live. We took the child to New York. Thanks to the miraculous sacrifice of doctors and nurses, the child stayed alive for 6 months and then died. If that child were here today, and I was told the same thing, my granddaughter, Noelle, for example, that child could stay alive for 10 or 15 years or maybe for the rest of her life. And so I don't think that you make an exception based on medical knowledge at the time.
Right. This has nothing to do with abortion.
Life is very, very precious.
Nothing to do with abortion.
And look,
and no one's saying you cannot make that decision. That's the thing, is no one's saying you cannot make that decision. No one's saying is, okay, well, the baby has 6 months to live. Sorry, we're making this decision for you. That's not what the question is. The question is, would they be criminalized? Which is what you said you would do.
Others disagree with it, but when I was
or they can't even get an abortion
across the river from Washington, and saw our grandchild christened.
That's why I hate this fucking question. I know we're gonna get it, though. I know. I just gotta accept it.
That the mother had not aborted that child and put the child up for adoption, and so I just feel this is where I'm coming from, and it is personal, and I don't assail him on that issue. Or others on that issue.
It's like it's a personal decision.
That's the way I, George Bush, feel about it.
1 minute for Governor Dukakis.
Stop clapping. Fucking everyone's clapping.
Kitty and I had very much the same kind of experience that the Bushes had. We lost a baby. Lived about 20 minutes after it was born. But isn't the real question that we have to answer not how many exceptions we make, because the Vice President himself is prepared to make exceptions. It's who makes the decision. Who makes this very difficult, very wrenching decision? And I think it has to be the woman, in the exercise of her own conscience and religious beliefs, that makes that decision.
Right.
Who are we
Better
to say,
answer
well,
than
under
last
certain
time.
circumstances, it's all right, but under other circumstances, it isn't? That's a decision that only a woman can make after consulting her conscience and consulting her religious principles. And I would hope that we would give to women in this country the right to make that decision and to make it in the exercise of their conscience and religious beliefs.
Governor, Margaret has a question for you.
Governor, I'd like to return to the topic of the defense budget for a minute. You have said in this campaign that you would maintain a stable defense budget. Yet you are on the board, on the advisory.
And incidentally, may I say that that's the decision of the Congress, and the President has concurred.
Yet you are on the board of a group called Jobs with Peace in Boston that advocates a 25% cut in the defense budget and the transfer of that money to the domestic economy.
Good.
My question is, do you share that goal, perhaps as a long-range goal? And if not, are you aware of, or why do you permit this group to continue to use your name on its letterhead for fundraising?
Well, I think I was on the advisory committee, Margaret. No, I don't happen to share that goal. It's an example of how oftentimes we may be associated with organizations, all of whose particular positions we don't support, even though we support in general the hope that over time, particularly if we can get those reductions in strategic weapons, if we can get a comprehensive test ban treaty, if we can negotiate with the Soviet Union and bring down the level of conventional forces in Europe with deeper cuts on the Soviet side, yes, at some point it may be possible to reduce defense outlays and use those for important things here at home, like jobs and job training and college opportunity and health and housing and the environment and the things that all of us care about. But I do think this, that the next president, even within a relatively stable budget, and that's what we're going to have for the foreseeable future, we'll have to make those tough choices that I was talking about and that Mr. Bush doesn't seem to want to make. And that really is going to be a challenge for the next president of the United States. I don't think there's any question about it. But I also see a tremendous opportunity now to
I really think Bush is just bouncing off of Reagan.
With the INF Treaty, which I strongly
Dukakis has not done bad in any of these debates. A couple questions I feel like he could have done better on, but so far he's been...
Get a test ban treaty, and to really make progress on the reduction of conventional forces in Europe. And if we can do that...
He's been very charismatic,
in a way that
which we know works.
Gets deeper cuts on the Soviet side, which is where they ought to come from. Then I think we have an opportunity over the long haul to begin to move some of our resources.
His policy talk has been a little vague, but
important domestic priorities.
Bush really hasn't been saying anything different.
College opportunity for that young woman whose mother wrote me from Texas just the other day, from Longview, Texas. 2 teachers, a mother and a father, who have a child that's a freshman in college, is an electrical engineering major, a very bright student, and they can't afford to keep that child in college. So I hope that we can begin to move those resources. It's not going to happen overnight. It certainly will have to happen on a step-by-step basis as we make progress in arms negotiation and arms control and arms reduction. But it certainly ought to be a long-term goal of all Americans, and I think it is.
1 minute for the Vice President.
The defense budget today takes far less percentage of the gross national product than it did in President Kennedy's time, for example. Moved tremendously. And you see, I think we're facing a real opportunity for world peace. This is a big question. And it's a question as to whether the United States will continue to lead for peace. See, I don't believe any other country can pick up the mantle. I served at the UN. I don't think we can turn over these kinds of decision of the collective defense to the United Nations or anything else. So what I'm saying is we are going to have to make choices. I said I would have the Secretary of Defense sit down, but while the President is negotiating with the Soviet Union, I simply do not want to make these unilateral cuts. And I think those that advocated the freeze missed the point that there was a better way, and that better way has resulted in a principle, asymmetrical cuts. Soviets take out more than we do, and the principle of intrusive verification. And those 2 principles can now be applied to conventional forces,
Thanks,
to
for the 2
strategic
bits.
forces, provided
they get that number 1 spot.
Our hand before we sit down at the table.
Andrea Mitchell for Governor Dukakis.
Governor, you've said tonight that you set as a goal the steady reduction of the deficit, and you've talked about making tough choices, so perhaps I can get you to make one of those tough choices. No credible economist
2 bits for 2 candidates
accepts as realistic your plan to handle the deficit by tightening tax collection.
Yeah, if everyone donates
investing in economic
$5 right now, Dukakis could have won president.
And cutting weapons systems. So
and some domestic programs as well, Andrew.
Some domestic programs as well. So let's assume now, for argument
Can't wait for the
purposes,
spam
that it is
emails
the
I'll
spring
get
of 1989,
from the Democrats.
And you are President Dukakis, and you discover
during the Republican
that
primaries.
all of those economists were right.
Have you
and
seen
you
what
were
they've
wrong.
said?
You are now facing
if everyone
that
donates
dreaded
$5, we can hit our goal this
increased
month.
Taxes. Which tax do you decide is the least onerous?
May I disagree with the premise of your question?
For the sake of argument, no.
As a matter of reality, I'm going to have to. because we have had not one but two detailed studies which indicate that there are billions and billions of dollars to be collected that are not being paid in. These are not taxes owed by average
He should have said that when he was
Americans.
asked
We don't have an alternative. We lose
what
it
would he
when
do
it's
if
taken
his
out of our
daughter
paycheck
was
before we even get it.
sexually assaulted.
But it's the Internal Revenue Service which estimates now that we aren't collecting $100 billion
do I have to answer that question?
in taxes
Why?
owed in this country. And that is just absolutely unfair to the vast majority of Americans who pay their taxes and pay
Why
them
these
on time.
hypotheticals?
The Dorgan Task Force, which included two Internal Revenue Commissioners, one a Republican, former Internal Revenue Commissioners, one a Republican, one a Democrat, was a bipartisan commission, a study by two respected economists, which indicated that we could collect some $40, $45, $50 billion of those funds.
$1 billion?
The point is, you've got to have a president who's prepared to do this and to begin right away, and preferably a president who, as a governor of a state, has had very, very successful experience at doing this. In my own state, we did it. In other states, we've done it. Republican governors as well as Democratic governors, and we've had great success.
Oh, that reminds me, I saw on Reddit a couple days ago a U.S. map of like where every president is from,
his campaign manager,
and it's like pretty crazy how like most of them are kind of in the general area. So if you want your kid to become president, you should have a kid in these like specific spots.
To hire Internal Revenue agents to go out.
There's a couple that were in Georgia, a couple in.
I'm happy to join Jim Baker in saying that we agree on this. But the fact of the matter is,
I think it was one in Massachusetts.
This is something that we must begin. It's going to take at least.
Granted, some of those places were like big, populated areas, so I guess higher chance.
Estimated that we could collect about $35 billion in the fifth year.
Yeah, some of them were Midwest and Central South. Yeah.
The other study even more than that. And
a lot of Georgia.
That's where you begin.
1 minute response, Mr. Vice President.
Well, Andrea, you didn't predicate that lack of economist support for what I call a flexible freeze, because some good, very good economists do support that concept. And I think where I differ with the governor of Massachusetts is I am optimistic. They jumped on me yesterday being a little optimistic about the United States. I am optimistic, and I believe we can keep this longest expansion going. I was not out there when that stock market dropped, wringing my hands and saying this was the end of the world, as some political leaders were, because it isn't the end of the world. And what we have to do is restrain the growth of spending, and we are doing a better job of it. The Congress is doing a better job of it, and the dynamics work, but they don't work if you go raise taxes and then the Congress spends it, continues to spend that. The American working man and woman are not taxed too little. The federal government continues to spend too much. Oops, hold it.
Mr. Vice President, Andrea has a question.
Hold it
For
there.
that matter, people such as ourselves here on this panel.
More so you than me, but
we could argue about that.
No,
Where's
but
this cut?
you got to go back to what Social Security was when it was created.
Guess
It
there's
wasn't created as a
missing
welfare
film or
program.
something.
It wasn't created that it was created as a whole retirement or help supplement to retirement program. It wasn't created as a welfare program. So here's what's happened. We came into office and the Social Security Trust Fund was in great jeopardy. And the president took the leadership, working with the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress. Some tough calls were made, and the Social Security Trust Fund was put back into sound, solvent condition. So I don't want to fool around with it. And there's a good political reason, because it's just about this time of year that the Democrats start saying the Republicans are going to take away your Social Security. It always works that way. I've seen it in precinct politics in Texas, and I've seen it at the national level. We have made the Social Security Trust Fund sound, and it is going to be operating at surpluses, and I don't want the liberal Democratic Congress to spend out of that Social Security Trust Fund or go and take the money out for some other purpose. I don't want that, and I will not go in there and suggest changes in Social Security. I learned that the hard way, and the governor and I both supported slipping the COLAs for 1 year. He supported it at the National Governors Conference, and I supported it in breaking a tie in a major compromise package, and we got assailed by the Democrats in the election over that, and I am going to keep that Social Security Trust Fund sound and keep our commitment to the elderly, and maybe down the line, maybe when you get 2 decades or 1 into the next century, you're going to have to take another look at it, but not now. We do not have to do it.
All right,
Keep
let's look at
trust with the older men and women of this country.
Governor, right there,
you
right when
have
he
1
said
minute,
it.
sir.
2023.
Andrew, I don't know which George Bush I'm listening to. George Bush a few years ago said that Social Security was basically a welfare system.
Oh, come
and
on.
in 1985, he flew back from the West Coast to cut that COLA. I voted against that at the National Governors Association. We won a majority. We didn't win the 2/3 that was necessary in order to pass that resolution, George, but everybody knew what we were doing, and I've opposed that. The reason that we raise concerns, not just in election years, but every year, is because Republicans, once they're elected, go in there and start cutting. You did it in 1985. The administration tried to do it repeatedly in 81, 82, and I'm sure you'll try to do it again, because there's no way that you can finance what you want to spend. There's no way you can pay for that 5-year, $40 billion tax cut for the rich and still buy all those weapon systems you want to buy unless you raid the Social Security Trust Fund.
Ann Compton for the Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, there are 3 justices of the Supreme Court who are in their 80s, and it's very likely the next president will get a chance to put a lasting mark on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, about that.
Would your nominees to the Supreme Court have to pass something that has been called a kind of conservative ideological litmus test? And would you give us an idea of perhaps who 2 or 3 people on your
let a free Supreme Court go by?
I feel pretty confident tonight, but not that confident. And secondly, I don't have any litmus test. But what I would do is appoint people to the federal bench that will not legislate from the bench, who will interpret the Constitution. I do not want to see us go to, again, and I'm using this word advisedly, a liberal majority that is going to legislate from the bench. They don't like the use of the word, but may I remind his strong supporters that only last year in the primary, to capture that Democratic nomination, he said, I am a progressive liberal Democrat. I won't support judges like that. There is no litmus test on any issue, but I will go out there and find men and women to interpret. And I don't have a list, but I think the appointments that the President has made to the bench have been outstanding, outstanding appointments.
Including Bork?
Yeah.
Governor, you have a 1-minute response time.
If the Vice President of the United States thinks that Robert Bork was an outstanding appointment,
who's Robert Bork?
That is a very good reason for voting for Mike Dukakis and Lloyd Bentsen on the 8th of November.
Robert
and I think Mr.
Bork.
Bush
Is he still
the Bork nomination? You know, Mr. Bush has never appointed a judge. I've appointed over 130, so I have a record.
Oh, he's dead. He died in 2012.
I'm very proud of it. I don't ask people whether they're Republicans or Democrats. I've appointed prosecutors. I've appointed defenders.
Yeah, he's Supreme Court.
I don't appoint.
In 1987, President Ronald Reagan nominated Bork to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Senate rejected his nomination after a contentious and highly publicized confirmation hearing. Okay.
And those are the standards.
He was on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit.
Nominating people to the Supreme Court of the United States. These appointments are for life. These appointments are for life, and when the Vice President talks about liberals on the bench, I wonder who he's talking about. Is he talking about a former governor of the state of California who was a former prosecutor?
Governor?
And a Republican named Earl Warren? Because I think Chief Justice Warren was an outstanding Chief Justice, and I think most Americans do too.
Ann Compton has a question for you.
Yeah, 42 to 58 rejection.
Governor, millions of Americans are entitled
and was eventually
to
filled by
some
Anthony
protections and
Kennedy.
benefits that the federal government provides, including Social Security, pensions, Medicare for the elderly, Medicaid for
but
the
she
poor.
retired in
In fact, there are so
2018.
many millions of Americans who are eligible. The government just can't continue to pay for all of those programs as they're currently constituted. A blue ribbon panel shortly after the election is likely to recommend that you go where the money is when you make budget cuts, and that means entitlements. Before the election, would you commit yourself to any of those hard choices, such as which one of those entitlements ought to be redrawn?
Andrea, why do people who want to balance budgets or bring the deficit down always go to those programs which tend to benefit people of very modest means? You know, 2/3 of the people in this country who receive Social Security checks live entirely on that check. They have no other income. And yet Mr. Bush tried to cut their cost of living increase in 1985.
Interesting. I'm just going down the rabbit hole of all the
less expensive. Medical care for the elderly is getting more expensive, with greater deductibles, with fewer benefits.
Bring all about the Judiciary Committee here.
This administration that have cut and chopped and reduced the kinds of
like how he was chosen.
One gets under
the
Medicare.
Anthony
Yes,
Kennedy.
we now have catastrophic health insurance, but it's going to cost, and that's going to be an additional burden on elderly citizens. It had bipartisan support. It should have had bipartisan support, but I suggest that we.
Bork actually
advised
Mitt Romney
citizens across this country. So I'm not going to begin, and I'm not going to go to
in 2012, right before he died,
as a means for cutting that deficit when we're spending billions on something like Star Wars, when we're spending billions on other weapon systems, which apparently the Vice President wants to keep in his back pocket or someplace, but which, if we continue to spend billions on them, will force us to cut Social Security, to cut Medicare, to cut these basic entitlements to people of very, very modest means. Now, there are some things we can do to help people who currently do get
Damn, still a half hour left. Sometimes I feel like it's already been an hour and a half, and it's always an hour.
Possibilities of helping millions and millions.
It's usually around the hour mark where I get a little disinterested, but
I'm proud to say that we finally have a welfare reform bill.
I feel like all the good questions are in the
Ruby
beginning.
Sampson's and Don Lawson's, hundreds of thousands of welfare mothers in this country and in my state and across the country who today
Overall,
are
still
working
good.
and earning are examples of what can happen when you provide training for those welfare mothers and some daycare for their children so that those mothers can go into a training program and get a decent job. That's the way you bring a deficit down and help to improve the quality of life of people at the same time.
1 minute for the Vice President.
I think I've addressed it, but let me simply say, for the record, I did not vote to cut COLAs. And I voted the same way that he did 3 months before in a national governor's conference. And he said at that time, quote, and this is a paraphrase, a freeze, that's easy. So I don't believe that we need to do what you've suggested here. And I've said that I'm going to keep this Social Security entitlement, to keep that trust fund sound. But I do think there are flexible ways to solve some of the pressing problems, particularly that affect our children. And I have made some good, sound proposals. But again, we've got a big difference on child care, for example. You see, I want the families to have the choice. I don't want to see the federal government licensing grandmothers. I don't want to see the federal government saying to communities, well, you can't do this anymore. We're going to tell you how to do it all. I want flexibility. And I do, you know, these people laugh about the 1,000 points of life. You ought to go out and you ought to go out and see around this country what's happening in the volunteer sector. American helping American. And I want to keep it alive in child care and in other entitlements.
Margaret Warner for Governor Dukakis.
Governor, I'm going to pass on the question I originally planned to ask you to follow up on your rebuttal to a question Andrea asked, and that involves Social Security. Now, it is true, as you said, that originally you sought an exemption for Social Security COLAs in this National Governors Association vote. But when you lost that vote, you then endorsed the overall freeze proposal. And what's more, you had great criticism of your fellow governors who wouldn't go along as political cowards. You said,
that is absolutely not true.
You said it takes guts and it takes will.
That is absolutely not true. It had nothing to do with the debate on Social Security. It had to do with the discussion we had the previous day on the overall question of reducing a budget.
My question is, aren't you demagoguing the Social Security issue?
I just have to correct the record. That simply isn't true. Now, we're not a parliamentary body, the National Governors Association. We vote on resolutions. If you don't get a 2/3, then your resolution doesn't pass. But everybody knew that those of us who voted against the freezing of COLAs did so. We did so emphatically, and I never made that statement, never would. The point is that as we look at this nation's future, and we have two very different visions of this future. I want to move ahead. The Vice President talks about 1,000
Sorry,
points
Mickey
of light.
Barkin. I know I left.
I'm interested in 240 million points of light. I'm interested in 240 million citizens in this country
I can't stand it. I was done.
who share in the American dream.
The Dukakis slander just made me get so mad.
As we look at the decisions that the next President of the United States is going to have to make, I just don't believe the place you go first is those programs, those so-called entitlements which provide a basic floor of income and a modest amount of medical care for the elderly, for the disabled, for people who can't make their way on their own, and in many cases have given a great deal to this country. The Vice President did call Social Security a few years ago basically or largely a welfare program. It isn't. It's a contract between generations. It's something that we pay into now so that we will have a secure retirement, and our parents and grandparents will have a secure retirement. It's a very sacred contract, and I believe in it. So that's not where we ought to go. There are plenty of places to cut. There's
what did we do beforehand? Did we just hope? Well, I guess we just died, right? We just worked till we died.
American taxpayer. There are.
Because most people just lived to 40 before Social Security. Because we all worked like 15-hour days, 6 days a week.
Those are the programs that we ought to review first.
I just want to know like what. I gotta look up more on like what was retirement like beforehand, if there was any.
Farm subsidies. We have a fundamental difference approach on agriculture. He favors this supply maintenance or production controls. He said that.
Or you worked at maybe somewhere for 30 years and then you guaranteed something, some sort of
was good legislation,
lifetime pension after that?
Outstanding legislation. And I believe the answer to the agricultural economy is not to get the government further involved, but to do what I'm suggesting. First place, never go back to that Democratic grain embargo. That liberal Democrat
bullshit
grain embargo that knocked the markets right out from under us and made Mr. Gorbachev say to me when he was here, how do I know you're reliable suppliers? We never should go back to that. And we ought to expand our markets abroad. We ought to have rural enterprise zones. We ought to move forward swiftly on my ideas of ethanol, which would use more corn and therefore create a bigger market for our agricultural products. But let's not go back and keep assailing a farm bill that passed with overwhelming Democrat and Republican support. The farm payments are going down because the agricultural economy is coming back.
Margaret Warner has a question for you, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, I'd like to cover a subject that wasn't covered in the first debate. You have said in this campaign, I am an environmentalist, and described yourself as having zero tolerance for polluters, and yet your record does seem to suggest otherwise. When you were head of the President's Task Force on Regulatory Relief, you did urge EPA to relax regulations involving the elimination of lead from gasoline. I believe you urged suspension of rules requiring industries to treat toxic waste before discharging them in sewers. And your group also urged OSHA to weaken the regulations requiring that workers be informed of dangerous chemicals at the work site. Finally, I believe you did support the President's veto of the Clean Water Act. And my question is, how do you square your campaign rhetoric with this record?
90% reductions in lead since I chaired that regulatory task force. 90%. It's almost, you remember that expression, get the lead out? It's almost out.
Get the lead
almost gone. Clean water?
Base environmentalist Bush? Come on.
What I'm not for What I'm not for is measuring it the way that the Democratic Congress does. We set up a good bill on clean water, a sound bill on clean water, but the only way you can express your love for clean water is to double the appropriations for clean water and then rant against the deficit. I am for clean water. I've been an outdoorsman and a sportsman all my life. I've been to these national parks. I led for the Bro-Wallop bill, or what formerly Dingell-Johnson. I headed the task force when I was a member of the Congress way back in the late 60s on these kinds of things on the Republican side. I led for that. And so I don't.
Too bad all the military bases and stuff are, you know,
that is the same old
creating so much
it gotten us into the trouble
waste and
on the deficit side. So I'll just keep
and
saying
the like.
I am one.
Like I said, I used my example that's right nearby us.
Sludge from Massachusetts.
It's now a
New Jersey. I'm not going to do that. That boo is excessively loud. Can you add 5 seconds, Bernie? Out of fairness, come on. Give me 5. I mean,
God damn it.
This is too much down it. But I'm not going to do that. I am an environmentalist.
Freaking lost my thought. There's a park now you can drive through.
I'll do a good job because
that used to be an old army base, an arsenal. And then up until like 95, there was like a bunch of toxic waste there and stuff. And it took them forever to get rid of all of it, supposedly get rid of all of it. There's bison on there now.
Top foreign policy advisors. I'm against the grain embargo. It was a mistake. I'm also against the pipeline embargo, which you folks attempted to impose. That was a mistake as well and cost thousands of jobs to American workers.
No, get rid of the fucking... I'm still sick of the pipelines. Did you all see that in the new budget bill that they passed
George Bush I'm talking about here, or
a pipeline? I think it's supposed to go... I forgot exactly where, but it's...
The early 80s, and
they just snuck it in there.
EPA, or the one we've been seeing and listening to the past 2 or 3 months. But let me say this, because he spent millions and millions of dollars on advertising on the subject of Boston Harbor. George, Boston Harbor was polluted for 100 years. I'm the first governor to clean it up. No thanks to you. No thanks to you. And we've been cleaning it up for 4 years. We passed landmark legislation in '84.
Yeah, it was in Mountain Valley Pipeline.
To kill the Clean Water Act and those grants,
Governor,
which make it possible for states and local communities to clean up rivers and harbors and
I don't know where that is, but I think it's...
Andrea Mitchell has a question for you, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. Vice President, Jimmy Carter has called this the worst campaign ever. Richard Nixon has called it trivial, superficial, and inane. Whoever started down this road first of negative campaigning, the American people, from all reports coming to us, are completely fed up. Now, do you have any solutions to suggest? Is there time left to fix it? There are 26 days left. For instance, would you agree to another debate before it's all over so that the American people would have another chance before Election Day to compare you two?
No, I will not agree to another debate. The American people are up to here with debates. They had 30 of them. We had 7 of them. Now we got 3 of them. I am going to carry this election debate all across this country in the last, whatever remains of the last 3.5 weeks or whatever we have.
Damn, so now we know.
The answer is no. I am not going to have any more debates. We don't need any more debates. I've spelled out my position. In terms of negative campaigning, you know, I don't want to sound like a kid in the schoolyard. He started it. But take a look at the Democratic Convention. Take a look at it. Do you remember the senator from Boston chanting out there, and the ridicule factor from that lady from Texas that was on there? I mean, come on. This was just outrageous. But
that's gonna be me at the end. I'm gonna say no more debates.
Keep it on a high plane. But let me, if you could accept a little
It's
criticism.
gonna be me once we hit freaking Trump versus Biden and be like, no more debates.
And spoke about agricultural issues in about 7 stops. We had some fun. Crystal Gale, Loretta Lynn with us. And they got up and sang, went to little towns. And I talked agriculture. And not one thing did I see, with respect, on your network about my views on agriculture. And not one did I read in any newspaper. Why? Because you're so interested in a poll that might have been coming out, or because somebody had said something nasty about somebody else. And so I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. Somebody hit me and said, Barry Goldwater said you ought to talk on the issues more. How can Barry Goldwater, sitting in Arizona, know whether I'm talking on the issues or not when we put out position paper after position paper? He puts out position paper after position paper, and we see this much about it because everyone else is fascinated with polls and who's up or down today and who's going to be up or down tomorrow. So I think we can all share with
I kind of agree with that, though.
The fact that maybe the message
it's fun,
is
though.
not getting out.
It's fun. During the Democratic primaries, it was fun to be like, what's the latest polls saying?
Governor Dukakis, you have 1 minute to respond, sir.
God, there was that brief moment when Bernie won Nevada. We were like, oh my God, we're going to get Bernie. We're going to get Bernie. That freaking Biden coalition.
That's my 5 seconds, George. Andrew, I think we both have a responsibility to try to address the issues. Yes, we have fundamental differences. I think a great many of them have come out today. But I think if we get rid of the labels, and I'm not keeping count, but I think Mr. Bush has used the label liberal at least 10 times. If I had $1, George, for every time you use that label, I'd qualify for one of those tax breaks for the rich that you want to give away.
He's laughing about it because he knows.
The point? Most Americans believe in basic values. We have differences
if
about
that wasn't true, he'd be mad.
I want to move forward. I want this nation to move forward. I'm concerned about the fact that 10% of our manufacturing and 20% of our banking and nearly half of the real estate in the city of Los Angeles are in the hands of foreign investors. I'm concerned about what that does to our future. I'm concerned about the fact that so many of our securities are in the hands of foreign banks because of these massive deficits. But those are the issues on which we ought to be debating, and if we can just put away the flag factories and the balloons and those kinds of things and get on to a real discussion of these issues, I think we'll have a good 26 days.
Andrea Mitchell has a question for you, Governor Dukakis. Beg your pardon? Andrea Mitchell has a question for you, sir.
Well, we're talking about issues, so let's return to something you said earlier about the modernization of land-based missiles. You said that you didn't rule it out, but that there are limits to what we can spend. And then you went on to talk about a much more expensive part of our defense strategy, namely conventional forces. Do you somehow see conventional forces as a substitute for our strategic forces? And in not talking about the land-based missiles and not committing to modernizing, do you somehow believe that we can have a survivable nuclear force based on the air and sea legs of our triad?
I think we ought to be looking at modernization. I think we ought to be exploring less expensive ways to get it on land, and we ought to make sure that we have an effective and strong and credible nuclear deterrent, but we also need well-equipped and well-trained and well-supported conventional forces. And every defense expert I know, including people in the Pentagon itself, will tell you that given the level of defense spending and the level of defense appropriations, which the Congress has now approved, the President has signed, there's no way that you can do all of these things and do them well. That's why tough choices will be required. Choices I'm prepared to make, Mr. Bush is not prepared to make. But Andrea, I think we can go far beyond this as well, because we have opportunities now, step by step, to bring down the level of strategic weapons and get a test ban treaty, negotiate those conventional force reductions. I would challenge Mr. Gorbachev to join with us in limiting and eliminating regional.
I challenge Gorbachev to eat an entire large pepperoni pizza from Pizza Hut.
Let's get him working on Syria, their client state, and see if we can't get them to join Israel and other Arab nations, if at all possible, and Arab leaders, in finally bringing peace to that troubled region. And I think that's one reason why we need fresh leadership in the White House that can make progress now in bringing peace to the Middle East. Let's go to work and end this fiasco in Central America, a failed policy which has actually increased Cuban and Soviet influence. The Democratic leaders of Central and Latin America want to work with us. I've met with them. I know them. I've spent time in South America. I speak the language. So does Senator Benson. We want to work with them and build a new relationship, and they with us. But not a one of those key Democratic leaders support our policy in Central America. And we've got to work with them if we're going to create an environment for human rights and democracy for the people of this hemisphere, and go to work on our single most important problem, and that is the avalanche of drugs that is pouring into our country and virtually destroying those countries.
The avalanche of cocaine.
Of priorities for national security and for foreign policy that I want to pursue. Mr. Bush and I have major differences on these issues, and I hope very much to be president and pursue them.
Mr. Vice President, you have 1 minute.
In terms of regional tensions, we have now gotten the attention of the Soviet Union. And the reason we've gotten it is because they see us now as unwilling to make the very kinds of unilateral cuts that have been called for, and to go for the discredited freeze. My opponent had trouble, criticized us on our policy in Angola. It now looks, because of steady negotiation, that we may have an agreement that will remove the Cubans from Angola.
It's pretty crazy how much his son looks like him.
Out of Afghanistan. That wouldn't have stopped.
Like even with the hairline and everything.
Wouldn't have even started the Soviets coming out if we hadn't even been willing to support the freedom fighters there. And the policy in Central America, regrettably, has failed because the Congress has been unwilling to support those who have been fighting for freedom. Those Sandinistas came in and betrayed the trust of the revolution. They said it was about democracy, and they have done nothing other than
my memory is correct. I feel like George W. Bush has more of a Texas accent than
Compton for Governor
HW does.
Governor, nuclear weapons need nuclear material replenished on a regular basis, and just this week, yet another nuclear manufacturing plant was closed because of safety concerns. Some in the Pentagon fear that too much priority
100%.
has been put on new weapons programs, not enough on current programs, and worry that the resulting shortage would be amounting to nothing less than unilateral nuclear disarmament. Is that a priority that you feel has been ignored by this administration? Are the Pentagon officials making too much of it?
Well, it's a great concern of mine, and I think of all Americans, and perhaps the Vice President can tell us what's been going on. This is another example of misplaced priorities. An administration which wants to spend billions on weapon systems we don't need and can't afford, and now confronts us with a very serious problem in plants that are supposed to be producing tritium and plutonium and providing the necessary materials for existing weapons. Yes, if we don't do something about it, we may find ourselves unilaterally, if I may use that term, dismantling some of these weapons. What's been going on? Who's been in charge? Who's been managing this system? Why have there been these safety violations? Why are these plants being closed down? I don't know what the latest cost estimates are, but it's going to be in the range of 25, 50, 75, $100 billion.
Billion.
Now, somebody has to bear the responsibility for this. Maybe the Vice President
Closing the plants.
But I'm somebody who believes very strongly in taking care of the fundamentals first before you start new stuff. And that's something which will be a priority of ours in the new administration, because without it, we cannot have the effective and strong and credible nuclear deterrent we must have.
Mr. Vice President, you have 1 minute.
That is the closest I've ever heard the governor of Massachusetts come to support anything having to do with nuclear. That's about as close as I've ever heard him.
He's now being clear on the nuclear.
Needs to be made more safe. Will he join me in suggesting that we may need another plant, maybe in Idaho, to take care of the requirements, nuclear material requirements for our Defense Department? I hope he will. This sounds like real progress here, because we've had a big difference on the safe use of nuclear power for our energy base. I believe that we must use clean, safe nuclear power. I believe that the more dependent we become on foreign oil, the less our national security is enhanced. And therefore, I've made some proposals to strengthen the domestic oil industry by more incentive going in to look for and find and produce oil. Made him some incentives in terms of secondary and tertiary production, but we're going to have to use more gas, more coal, and more safe nuclear power for our energy base. So I am one who believes that
Carter was the only one who was like talking about solar, and that quickly disappeared.
Mr. Vice President, as many as 100 officials in this administration have left the government under an ethical cloud. Some have been indicted, some convicted. Many of the cases have involved undue influence once they're outside of government.
It's a witch hunt.
If you become president, will you lock that revolving door that has allowed some men and women in the government to come back and lobby the very departments they once managed?
Yeah, and I'll apply it to Congress, too. I'll do both. I'll do both, because I think, you see, I am one who, I get kidded by being a little old-fashioned on these things, but I do believe in public service. I believe that public service is honorable. And I don't think anybody has a call on people in their administrations going astray. His chief education advisor is in jail. He's in jail because he betrayed the public trust, the head of education. And yet this man, the governor, equated the president to a rotting
bad
fish.
Decision if that's true.
He said that a fish rots from the head down as he was going after Ed Meese. Look, we need the highest possible ethical standards. I will have an ethical office in the White House that will be
They should ask this exact question to Donald Trump.
Concern. I will see that these standards apply to the United States Congress.
It's a witch hunt.
I hope I will do a good job as one who has had a relatively clean record with no conflicts of interest
politically
in his own
motivated.
public life, as has the governor. To
They didn't go after crooked Hillary.
Into public service. But there is no corner on this sleaze factor, believe me. And it's a disgrace, and I will do my level best to clean it up, recognizing that you can't legislate morality. But I do believe that with my record in Congress, having led the new congressman,
everyone leaving is you were vice president under Reagan. I don't understand how you could just like
full disclosure that
be like, yeah, we're going to clean it up.
And
acting like you weren't there.
About percentage appointments, more members of Congress who have been under investigation percentage-wise than people in the executive branch.
Oh my God.
And so it isn't one, and state governments have had a tough time. Some of his college presidents aren't exactly holier than thou. So let's not be throwing stones about it. Let's say this isn't Democrat or Republican,
drain the swamp,
and it isn't liberal or conservative. Let's vow to work together
Classic
to do
Hillary
something
quote.
about it.
Bush wants to drain the swamp.
Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
And I would agree that integrity is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's an American issue. But here again, I don't know which George Bush I'm listening to. Wasn't this the Mr. Bush that supported Mr. Meese? Called James Watt an excellent Secretary of the Interior? Provided support for some of these people, supported the nomination of Robert Bork to the Supreme Court of the United States? We've had dozens and dozens of officials in this administration who have left under a cloud, who have left with a special prosecutor on their arm, have been indicted, convicted.
And that's why my one guy is in jail.
We need, and one of the reasons our selection of a running mate is so important and is such a test of the kinds of standards we'll set is because it tells the American people in advance of the election just what kind of people we're looking for. I picked Lloyd Benson. Mr. Bush picked Dan Quayle. I think that says a great deal to the American people about the standards we'll set and the quality of the people that we will pick to serve in our administration.
To each of you candidates, regrettably, I have to inform you that we have come to the end of our questions. That's a pity. Before I ask the candidates to make their closing remarks, on behalf of the Commission on Presidential Debates, I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Governor Dukakis, yours is the first closing statement, sir.
28 years ago, as a young man just graduated from law school, I came to this city, came clear across the country to watch John Kennedy be nominated for the presidency of the United States, right here in Los Angeles. I never dreamed that someday I would win that nomination and be my party's nominee for president. That's America. That's why I'm proud and grateful to be a citizen of this country. 26 days from today, you and millions of Americans will choose two people to lead us into the future as President and Vice President of the United States. Our opponents say things are okay. Don't rock the boat. Not to worry. They say we should be satisfied. But I don't think we can be satisfied when we're spending $150 billion a year on interest alone on the national debt, much of it going to foreign bankers, or when 25% of our high school students are dropping out of school, or when we have 2.5 million of our fellow citizens, a third of them veterans, who are homeless,
true?
living on streets and doorways in this
of
country, or
high school graduates are
Mr.
not.
Bush's prescription
People
for
aren't finishing
economic
high school. Is that what he's
future
saying?
another tax giveaway to the rich.
We're not getting a job. What is?
We can do better than that. Not working with government alone, but all of us working together. Lloyd Benson and I are optimists, and so are the American people. And we ask you for your hands and your hearts and your votes on the 8th of November so we can move forward into the future. Kitty and I are very grateful to all of you for the warmth and the hospitality that you've given to us in your homes and communities all across this country. We love you, and we're grateful to you for everything that you've given to us. And we hope that we'll be serving you in the White House in January of 1989. Thank you, and God bless you.
That was bad.
Vice President Bush, your closing statement, sir.
Sometimes it does seem that a campaign generates more heat than light. And so let me repeat, I do have respect for my opponent, for his family, for the justifiable pride he takes in his heritage. But we have enormous differences. I want to hold the line on taxes and keep this the longest expansion in modern history going until everybody in America benefits. I want to invest in our children because I mean it when I say I want a kinder and gentler nation. And by that, I want to have child care where the families, the parents, have control. I want to keep our neighborhoods much, much better in terms of anti-crime. And that's why I would appoint judges that have a little more sympathy for the victims of crime and a little less for the criminals. That's why I do feel if some police officer is gunned down, that the death penalty is required. I want to help those with disabilities fit into the mainstream. There is much to be done.
I need to drop the freaking death threat.
Is about big things.
For the death penalty.
And perhaps the biggest
we
is
need to threaten
peace. And I
criminals.
ask you to consider the experience I have had in working with a president who has revolutionized the situation around the world. America stands tall again, and as a result, we are credible, and we have now achieved a historic arms control agreement. I want to build on that. I'd love to be able to say to my grandchildren 4 years after my first term, I'd like to say, your grandfather, working with the leaders of the Soviet Union, working with the leaders of Europe,
he said first term. He wants to go for a second already.
Chemical and biological weapons from the face of the earth. Lincoln called this country the last best hope of man on earth. And he was right then, and we still
That's awful if
that's the last
if you believe that.
best hope of man on earth. And I ask for your support on November 8th, and I will be a good president.
He knew he'd be one term.
Together, we can do wonderful things for the United States and for the free world. Thank you very, very much.
Well, okay, this side of the crowd isn't standing, so I wonder if this is Republican and this is Democrat. It's got to be. All right, who won 84? Or you mean 88? All right, well, this is what happens. Well, let's actually look back at 84. Obviously, huge landslide. Mondale only had Minnesota and I believe District of Columbia. Total swamped for Mondale. And then Democrats got a couple more this time, but still not very good. Not very good. 48 million votes for Bush. Actually, I wanted to look up what the U.S. population 1988. Because I'm curious how many people voted. That's not that many. 244 million. And according to this, only 80 million voted. I mean, she did rough math on that. Or wait, is it? I always forget how to do division. Is that right? How do you do division? I'm so dumb with math. 244 is including Cades. Yeah, that's true. Whatever it is, I think it's what? Less than a third, right? Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, it's probably less than a third, but I guess it's still a decent amount. So, because I was looking at 84, I think more people voted in 84. 240? So like 1/3. Okay. Give or take. But yeah, so let's see what happened here. Bush attacked Dukakis as an elite Massachusetts liberal, to which Dukakis appeared to fail to respond effectively. Despite Dukakis' initial lead in polls, Bush pulled ahead after the Republican National Convention, extended his lead after strong performances in 2 debates. It's crazy. I don't feel like he was that great in both debates. I mean, I wouldn't say Dukakis clearly won, but like Dukakis was a lot better. Bush won a decisive victory over Dukakis in the Electoral College. Let's see about his campaign. Oh, so he wasn't a tank. That's what that tank joke was. Okay. He staged a photo op with where he rode in a tank to support his military matters or whatever. Kind of backfired on him. John McCain actually talked about Bush as vice president. During his course of campaign, Dukakis fired as deputy field director after she spread false rumors that Bush had an affair with his assistant, Jennifer Fitzgerald. Bush and Fitzgerald's relationship was briefly rehashed in the 92 campaign. Oh, here's some polling. I feel like last time there wasn't a polling section, but so yeah, like New York Times. Yeah, so he was doing well until the national convention. Yeah, kind of really lost his lead. I mean, 51% to 42 is pretty big. Remember we saw the Reagan and Carter one where Carter was doing great and then Reagan just like pulled ahead in the last 2 months. Jesus Christ. Yeah, 91 million voted in total. So I guess that's pretty good turnout then for a U.S. election. Bush destroys those. Wow. Bush destroys those facts and logic. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, here you go. So moderates liked Dukakis, 51%, but still it's like such a close margin. 81-18, 81-19. 42%. Yeah, see, he lost the independent votes. I think Reagan was doing the same. Reagan just kept doing well with the independent voters. Like I said, I think the debate still mattered at this point where I still say they do matter, but you know what I mean, where they mattered more for the independent voter. I feel like at this time. We'll have to pay attention to this. Damn, he just every age group. I mean, it was really the 45 to 59, which is like the boomers. Like I said, the boomers helped Reagan win. He did great here. Everyone who's poor voted for Reagan. But he did he get the union vote? Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, but like I said, Joe Biden ran the primary. Al Gore ran the primary, and we'll see them again very soon. Very soon. Dukakis, Benson. I don't love this. This is pretty bad. Where's the Republican one? 88. It's a little bit cleaner. What's Dan Quayle up to now? Is he alive? He is. Declined to run for president in 1996 because of, however you pronounce this, inflammation of a vein. He sought the Republican presidential nomination in 2000, but withdrew his campaign early on and supported the eventual nominee, George W. Bush. He's in an equity firm. He's remained quite active in the Republican Party, including making several presidential endorsements in 2000, 2012, and 2016. Who did he endorse in 2016? Can we guess? He endorsed Jeb Bush. Okay, that makes sense. He then endorsed Donald Trump. Oh, interesting. According to the book Peril by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa, Quayle played a central role in advising Vice President Mike Pence to certify the 2020 United States presidential election. And then he attended Joe Biden's inauguration. Oof. Oof. Yeah, I think one day we'll do the VP debates, maybe. We'll see. Yeah, maybe one day. This was kind of just, I wanted to just focus on, this and get us to the Republican primaries. Hold up, we'll look at this scene though. Hold up, what is this?
I have as much experience in the Congress as Jack Kennedy did when he sought the presidency.
Why is it loading?
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
That was really uncalled for, Senator.
That was really... Damn, that's... Dude, he's actually pissed.
You're the one that was making the comparisons, Senator.
Oof. Yeah, I think eventually we will do it, maybe. We'll see. I always say I'm going to do things, and I don't always follow through on them, so I'm not trying to commit to anything. But my general idea with this was to go through this series, and then... And if there's any Republican debates, we can watch those as they happen live, hopefully. And then, yeah, go from there. I've always wanted to do more politics stuff on stream, as I said in the past. And I did do, like, the presidential debates with Biden and Trump. And those were really fun to do, but it felt random, I guess. Maybe no one really thought about it that way, but I felt like it was random for my channel to do that. So I'm like, you know, always wanted to do it more, but then I kind of took a break from streaming the last, like, 5 months or so. But I feel like now is a good time to maybe, if I wanted to do more politics stuff, is to transition now to it more. I still want to do, like, you know, sock gang and stuff, but yeah, we'll see about future other stuff political wise. I know I want to do another episode of We Grow Together. At least I promised at least 3 episodes of that, so I'm hoping to do this the third one. Then I'm gonna think about whether or not I want to continue it or not. It's a lot of work to do, and I don't know how like exciting it is compared to this. Export all these debate views to YouTube. I know. I have been recording all these, so I think I will at some point. I think probably when I finish all of it, just because I probably will have to sit through and maybe make thumbnails or something for them. But we'll see. If I had all the time in the world, I would make clips from all these recordings, because I feel like there's been some fun ones I could make, but it's tough out here, you know? All right, y'all. I think that's it. Definitely, I think definitely up there. If not, probably my favorite so far. They're getting better. They're getting more fiery. I'm very interested about the next one with Perot, Bush, and Clinton, because we have 3 people. To see how that goes. And I think there's 3 of them. And I think they're all an hour and a half, so it's going to be extra long next time. So there's not too many of these short ones, short chunks that we'll have in the future. But yeah, I think the 90s will be fun. It'll be fun, and then we'll get into the 2000s there, which I think will be interesting, because I was really young in like first Bush election and whatnot. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. But yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for lurking. Thanks for staying after DJ Mule's raid. I really appreciate it. Shout out to DJ Mule again for the raid. Really, really nice of him to raid me. But yeah, next time, I don't know when the next one will be. I gotta look. Probably not this week. Very slim chance this week. And I'm going on camping this weekend. So taking kind of a break, obviously, from being online and stuff. So probably not until another week until we get back into this. And maybe that second week there, we might have to do, or the third week of June there, we might have to power through a couple more to keep on pace. Because I feel like we're at the 1/3 mark. I feel like. And we have about a month and 2 weeks to go. Oh, oh my God, we should do one on 4th of July, maybe. I'm not sure. Oh yeah. It's a non-D&D night too. Oh, we should do one on 4th of July. Maybe we fucking go crazy and we pack it. Maybe we do 2 chunks or something. Oh, that's a good idea. All right, I'll let y'all know when the next one will be. Hopefully Sock Gang will be returning soon as well in terms of gaming stuff. But appreciate y'all watching again. I'll catch y'all later, okay? Have a good one. Bye-bye.